Section 1. The World Behind the Walls of Spooner Street. There is a house on Spooner Street in a fictional Rhode Island town, and the light is always on. It has been on since the 31st of January 1999, when millions of people settled in after the Super Bowl and watched something strange and funny and unlike anything they had seen before. A bumbling, overweight father with the instincts of a golden retriever and the impulse control of a golden retriever who has gotten into the trash. A sharp, sarcastic talking dog who drank martinis and had opinions about Coltrane. A baby with an impossible British accent and an arsenal of advanced weaponry concealed beneath his crib. A patient, exhausted mother holding everything together through some force of will the show never bothered to examine closely enough. A teenage daughter treated like furniture by the people who were supposed to love her most. An awkward teenage son who existed primarily at the edges of scenes. And the whole improbable household arranged around each other on a street in a town that did not exist, in a state that did. That light on Spooner Street has not gone out in over 25 years. It burned through 2 cancellations. It survived the resurrection that almost nobody in television history had managed before or since. It burned while the show around it changed in ways that were sometimes inspired and sometimes genuinely distressing. It burned through the departure of the man who lit it and the long, strange years during which the show kept running on institutional momentum rather than creative passion. Through all of it, the light stayed on. And all the while the light was burning, the mysteries accumulated. They gathered in the corners of episodes that were trying to say something and then stepped back before saying it. They settled into backstories that were introduced and never followed through on. They pooled in the contradictions between what one season told us and what the next season either forgot or deliberately reversed. They deepened in the spaces beneath the comedy, in the dark room beneath the nursery where the weapons were kept, in the question of who Meg's father actually was, in the age on Quagmire's driver's license that the show smiled at and never explained, in the death that was undone and the deaths that were not. What you are about to listen to tonight is a walk. It is a long, slow, unhurried walk through all of it. Not a countdown. Not a list of plot holes ranked by severity. Not an argument about whether the show was good or bad in any particular period. Just a walk through every mystery, every abandoned story, every unresolved question, every detail that pulls at the edges of the show's internal universe and suggests, if you follow the thread far enough, that something stranger than a cartoon about a fat man in Rhode Island has been happening on that street all along. Some of what we will talk about tonight is almost certainly accidental. The natural residue of a writer's room producing 20-plus episodes a season for more than 2 decades, staffed by rotating teams of talented people who are always working toward the next episode rather than looking carefully back at the ones they left behind. In a production environment like that, continuity errors are inevitable. Characters state their ages inconsistently. Timeline details contradict each other. The geography of the fictional town shifts between seasons based on what any given script needs. Some of what we will discuss tonight is just that, the sediment of imprecision, but some of it is something else. Some of it was placed, dropped into specific scenes with specific care, like keys left on surfaces for a particular visitor to find, if that visitor was paying close enough attention. A name spoken in a courtroom that reveals a secret about a character's parentage while that character sits 5 feet away wearing headphones. A number on a driver's license that does not match the timeline of the character holding it, offered with a joke non-explanation so thin it is barely there at all. A revelation about the origin of the entire universe, tucked inside a Season 9 episode, presented with the casual confidence of someone who has decided to say the most extraordinary thing possible and then immediately move on. These feel less like mistakes and more like invitations. Come in. Look more closely. There is more here than the surface comedy admits. The town itself is the first piece of evidence, and it is worth spending a moment with before we go further in. It is designed to look like a real New England suburb. The colonial architecture, the harbor nearby, the insularity of a community that has been in the same place for a long time and has organized itself around that continuity. The visual language is specific and regional in a way that distinguishes it from the generic anywhere town settings of many animated comedies. It feels like somewhere. It feels like a place that has weather and history and a particular texture to its civic life. But the spatial logic of the town does not hold. The same drive that took 5 minutes in one episode takes 20 in another. Streets that connected in one season do not connect in the next. Buildings appear in positions where different buildings previously stood. The Griffin House, which we have seen from every angle across hundreds of episodes, which we should know better than almost any fictional dwelling in television history, has a floor plan that changes. Rooms change their positions relative to each other. The basement is sometimes much larger than the exterior footprint of the house could contain. The attic exists only when a story needs an attic. Stewie's nursery connects to a weapons laboratory whose square footage is never accounted for in the overall architecture of the building. The mundane explanation is production imprecision. Different teams, different seasons, different reference documents. A show that was never working from a single, consistent architectural Bible. And that explanation is probably mostly correct. But the show has not simply been unaware of these inconsistencies. It has, on multiple occasions, acknowledged and even made narrative use of them. In the Season 10 episode, Back to the Pilot, Brian and Stewie travel back in time to the events of the show's first episode in 1999. The world they arrive in looks different. Not just the animation style of the house itself, the proportions of the spaces, the visual relationships between locations are all slightly off from what the show looks like in the current season. And in a moment that is played as a background joke but carries more weight than a background joke usually does, a cutaway gag from the 1999 episode is shown happening off-screen, with the characters in the pilot simply standing and waiting for it to end, not experiencing it, not participating in it. The characters do not live through the cutaways. The cutaways happen around them. The show's internal universe contains something that its inhabitants are not subject to. And if that is true, if the world has elements that operate outside the experience of the people who live in it, then the question of what kind of world this actually is becomes genuinely complicated. We are going to spend tonight with that complication, not resolving it. The show has not resolved it, and it likely never will, but inhabiting it, walking all the way through it, and feeling what it feels like. Because the best mysteries do not need to be solved to be valuable. They need to be fully seen. And the mysteries of Family Guy, accumulated over 25 years of a show that cared about its characters even when it was failing them, deserve to be fully seen. The house on Spooner Street, the light that never goes out, the family inside it with their impossible histories and their unresolved questions, and the particular quality of love they have for each other that survives everything the show throws at it. Let us go inside. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know the time and place you are watching from tonight. We genuinely read every single one. There is something warm and strange about knowing you are out there in your corner of the world, listening to this while the night does what nights do. And if what we do here at Uncle Guy Lore feels like the right kind of company, subscribe before you fall asleep. It is free, it takes 1 second, and it means more to us than we usually know how to say. Now, let us begin properly. Section 2. The Brian Griffin Enigma, How Does a Dog Know Everything and Nothing? There is a white Labrador retriever sitting at the kitchen table of 31 Spooner Street, and he is nursing a dry martini with the practiced ease of someone who has been doing this for most of his adult life. He has opinions, specific, carefully considered, passionately held opinions about jazz, about literature, about the failures of the American political system, about which administrations handled which historical crises badly, and why the critics have never given John Coltrane his full due. About the relative merits of certain vintages of single malt Scotch whiskey, about whether the poetry of Pablo Neruda has been adequately appreciated by the American reading public, which is something that appears to concern Brian Griffin quite a lot. He drives a second-generation Toyota Prius with a Rhode Island license plate that reads Bry Dog. He attended Brown University and left without graduating. He has been working on a novel called Faster Than the Speed of Love for approximately as long as the show has existed, and he has never finished it. He votes, or at least holds very strong opinions about who should win elections, and expresses those opinions at length and at volume. He walks on his hind legs and uses his front paws as hands, and has experienced romantic attraction to human women, and has acted on that attraction with genuine consequences for everyone involved. He has held jobs as a journalist, as an actor, as a sober companion, as a would-be New Yorker contributor, as a cocaine dealer, which did not go well, and briefly as a mascot for a local beer brand, from which he was fired when someone better came along. He is a dog. He is also the most mysterious character in the entire show. Not because the show has been secretive about him, it has given us more information about Brian's background than about almost any other character. The mystery is not one of concealment. It is one of unexplained cause. The show has told us everything about what Brian is and almost nothing about why he is it. Every fact we have about him is also a question the show refuses to answer, and the questions accumulate into something that feels less like imprecision and more like deliberate evasion. Start at the beginning, because the beginning is where the mystery opens its first and deepest drawer. Brian Edward Griffin was born in a puppy mill outside of Austin, Texas. His mother was a dog named Biscuit. His father was a dog named Coco. He had 4 siblings in his litter. These facts are established in the Season 2 episode, Road to Rhode Island, the first episode to seriously excavate Brian's personal history, and they are presented with the casual authority of established fact. The puppy mill near Austin, the mother named Biscuit, the father named Coco, a litter of 5. Biscuit and Coco were not anthropomorphic. They were not intelligent in the way Brian is intelligent. They did not speak English. They did not form complex political opinions. They did not experience existential crises about the relationship between artistic ambition and actual creative output. They did not drive cars or attend Ivy League universities or develop romantic feelings for the wives of the families who adopted them. They were dogs. Conventional dogs, in the conventional sense, living conventional dog lives on a farm in Texas. Brian's 4 siblings, to whatever extent the show has indicated anything about them, appear to have been the same normal animals. No evidence of linguistic ability, abstract reasoning, or aesthetic sensitivity. Brian came out of that exact same litter as something categorically, fundamentally different from everything around him, and the show has spent 25 years depicting what he is, without once explaining how he came to be it. He arrived into the world fluent in English, apparently also fluent in French and Tagalog, both confirmed by the show, with a sophisticated aesthetic sensibility already intact, with a capacity for abstract reasoning, with a nervous system capable of addiction, romantic love, creative frustration, and the specific quality of grief that comes from discovering your dead mother has been turned into a table by the people who killed her. He was born into a context that could not have produced him, and the show has never been asked to reconcile this. The fan theory that has gained the most sustained traction, the one that connects most cleanly to the show's own established lore, is the CIA experiment hypothesis. Its foundation is the shared cosmological universe of Seth MacFarlane's shows. In American Dad, a CIA scientist named Dr. Klaus Heisler had his consciousness transferred into the body of a goldfish. The goldfish, named Klaus, speaks, reasons, forms complex personal attachments, experiences a full inner life, and maintains a distinctly human perspective on the world while inhabiting the body of a fish. The technology is established as real within the shared universe. It works. The result of the procedure is a creature that is, in every meaningful, functional sense, a human consciousness operating an animal body. If the CIA could achieve this result with a goldfish, they could achieve it with a dog. If Brian Griffin is the product of exactly this procedure, if a human or human-adjacent consciousness was placed into a Labrador Retriever puppy at or around the time of his birth near Austin, then everything about his nature becomes not just explicable but inevitable. He speaks because his brain is not structured like a dog's brain. He reasons at a human level because the apparatus doing the reasoning is human in origin. He cannot form normal canine relationships with normal dogs because his consciousness does not have a dog's instinctive relationship to the world. He experiences human emotions and human desires and human disappointments because the consciousness operating his body was built to experience things the way a human experiences them. The CIA experiment theory also provides a clean explanation for a detail the show introduced and never pursued: Brian's ability to reproduce with humans. His son Dylan, who appeared in Season 6, is the result of a relationship Brian had with a fully human woman. And Dylan is human, not half-dog, not a hybrid of any visible kind. He looks and behaves exactly like a human teenage boy, specifically like a sulky, resentful, inadequately parented teenage boy, and his human appearance is treated by the show as something requiring no explanation at all. But it requires a great deal of explanation. If Brian is biologically a Labrador Retriever, his offspring with a human woman should not produce a human child. The biological incompatibility should be absolute. Dylan's existence as a fully human-appearing person is not possible if Brian is simply what he appears to be on the outside. Whatever Brian's body looks like, its reproductive biology is apparently human-compatible in the deepest way it produces human children. The consciousness that was placed in the dog puppy from Austin brought its full human biological inheritance with it, and that inheritance expressed itself in the most fundamental biological way available. Dylan is the clearest evidence the show has ever offered for the CIA experiment theory, and the show has never connected these dots. Dylan appears for a few episodes in Season 6 and then disappears into the off-screen world that Family Guy uses as a holding area for inconvenient complications. His existence is noted and not followed up on. The biological impossibility his existence represents is not addressed. The question his existence raises about Brian's true nature is left entirely open. The Road to Rhode Island backstory adds a dimension to Brian's history that the CIA experiment theory complicates productively. In that episode, Brian and Stewie travel through Austin, and they stop at the puppy mill where Brian was born. Biscuit is dead. In a detail delivered with casual brutality, the mill operators had her taxidermied and turned into a table after her death. Biscuit is being used as furniture. Brian is destroyed by this. He and Stewie steal the taxidermied body and give it a proper burial. The scene has the emotional texture of genuine grief, not comedy grief, not grief played for laughs, but something that feels real and specific and earned. Brian loved his mother. He has specific memories of her from his earliest weeks. Real attachments formed in the period before whatever consciousness was placed in him was fully active in directing his behavior. The attachment is genuine, and confronting what has been done to her remains is genuinely devastating. If Brian is the product of a consciousness transfer, his grief for Biscuit is more complicated than it appears. He is grieving a dog who carried the body he was placed into. He is grieving an attachment formed in the liminal early period of his existence, when the original consciousness of the puppy and the transferred consciousness were perhaps both present, perhaps neither fully dominant. He is grieving something that is real but that does not fit neatly into any established category of relationship. The show does not go here. It gives you the burial and moves on. The complexity sits in the scene unexplored. Brian's education is another productive fragment of mystery. He attended Brown University. He did not graduate. When the New Yorker educated this after publishing his work, the magazine severed the relationship immediately. The humiliation of that discovery is one of his persistent wounds, the gap between the intellectual identity he has constructed and the actual credentials that would underpin it. He talks about books he has read. He talks about music he has studied. He performs very well the role of someone who has been genuinely educated in the humanities. And underneath that performance is an incomplete degree from a school in Providence that he was attending before the show began and left for reasons the show has never disclosed. What was Brian studying? Why did he leave? Was the departure voluntary, or were there circumstances that forced it? What was his life in Providence like in those years before the Griffin household became the central fact of his existence? Who were his friends? What did he want then, before the unfinished novel and the dry martinis and the frustrated ambitions settled over him like permanent weather? He knows what happened in those years. He has the memories. He has simply never shared them, and the show has never found a way to show us. And his pre-Griffin past remains a dark room that 25 years of episodes have walked past without opening. The novel Faster Than the Speed of Love is the show's clearest sustained symbol of the Brian mystery, and also the clearest symbol of the gap between who Brian believes himself to be and what he has actually produced. It has been present in the show's continuity since the beginning. It has been referenced in dozens of episodes. It has been mocked, encouraged, discussed, and set aside again. It is apparently semi-autobiographical, which would make it the story of a talking dog with literary ambitions living with a dysfunctional Rhode Island family. A story that is, in other words, the show itself, filtered through Brian's interior. The novel Brian cannot finish is the story the show already is. He is trying to write, from inside it, the thing you are watching from outside it, and the thing that keeps him from finishing is never named. Whether it is craft or courage or some fundamental uncertainty about what the story actually means, or some recognition that finishing it would require admitting something about himself, he is not ready to admit the show has held this mystery for 25 years without bringing it any closer to resolution. Brian's death in season 12 and resurrection 2 episodes later is the emotional center of this mystery, the place where all the other fragments converge. He was hit by a car in the driveway of the Griffin home. He died. The show mourned him, and then Stewie, using the time machine, went back and prevented it. The death was undone. The timeline was revised. The family retained no memory of having lost him, but Stewie does. The version of Stewie who saved Brian had already lived through the death and the grief and the 2 episodes of hollow, Brianless household life. He went back and fixed it, but he cannot unknow what it felt like to lose his closest friend. He carries both timelines. The one where Brian is alive, which is the one that currently exists, and the one where he was not, which was erased but which Stewie experienced as real. Nobody asks Stewie about this. The show does not pursue it. The knowledge Stewie carries from the erased timeline sits in him somewhere under all the subsequent episodes, the ghost of a grief that was real and then officially unreal, and never processed. That unprocessed grief is another mystery the show placed deliberately and then did not open. The Brian Griffin mystery, taken whole, is the question of what a person is when the circumstances of their existence cannot explain them. He came from a place and parents that could not have produced him. He has been somewhere and done things that the show has not shown us. He has a child who proves that what he appears to be on the outside is not the whole of what he is. He is carrying something inside him that the novel is a permanent and unfinished attempt to contain. And somewhere in the show's universe, in the erased timeline Stewie still remembers, there is a version of the Griffin household that had to figure out how to exist without him and discovered, in that figuring out, exactly how much he had been holding together without anyone acknowledging it while he was there. Section 3. Stewie's weapons room, the time machine, and the question of everything. Beneath the surface of what appears to be a completely ordinary nursery in a completely ordinary house in a completely ordinary suburb of fictional Rhode Island, there is something that should not exist. Take the nursery as the show presents it in 1999. Pastel walls painted the particular shade of yellow that nurseries and aspirational parenting magazines tend to feature. A white crib with a mobile turning slowly above it, small shapes rotating in the air currents. Stuffed animals arranged along a shelf with the slight imprecision that comes from a baby having tried to move them and almost succeeded. A changing table, a toy chest, curtains with friendly animal prints, an adult-sized rocking chair. Everything you would expect. Everything immediately recognizable as the nursery of a middle-class family in late 20th century America, furnished from a catalog and decorated with the hopeful care of parents who were trying to get this right. And concealed somewhere in that room behind a wall panel, beneath a floor section, through a door that blends into the baseboard trim, there is a room that contains a working laser cannon. Also a mind control helmet, a shrink ray, a weather control device, a genetic duplicator, and eventually, most significantly, a time machine, a working time machine, powered by plutonium, capable of precise navigation to any point in the causal structure of human history, whose operation Stewie Griffin has understood since before he could reliably hold a spoon. Stewie Griffin is 1 year old. He was born to Peter and Lois Griffin at a hospital in a fictional Rhode Island town. He is their youngest child. He is fed from a high chair with a bib around his neck. He is transported in a stroller with a sunshade. He takes naps. He wears diapers. He is, in every externally visible respect, a completely ordinary infant. And he has solved problems in theoretical physics that doctoral-level research programs are still working toward. He understands temporal mechanics with sufficient depth to construct a device capable of moving through time without generating paradoxes that would unmake the universe, most of the time. He understands directed energy physics well enough to build weapons that would be classified at the highest levels if they appeared on any government inventory anywhere. He understands genetics, atmospheric science, neurology, and apparently the complete theoretical basis for traversing parallel universes. The question of where this knowledge came from has a mundane answer and a real answer. The mundane answer is that Stewie is a cartoon character in a comedy show, and the internal logic of his capabilities is not supposed to be taken literally. The real answer is that the show has been taking it literally for 25 years. The weapons are real within the fiction, the time machine is real, the Big Bang causation is real. The show established these things as facts in its universe and has maintained them as facts, which means the question of where a 1-year-old child acquired the knowledge to build them is a genuine question that the show's universe contains and has never answered. No explanation has been offered. The knowledge arrived with Stewie. It was there when he was born. The parents who fed him and bathed him and read him bedtime stories, none of them taught him what he knows. The television he watched could not have conveyed it. The books available to a pre-reader did not contain it. The conversations he overheard between his parents could not have constructed it. He simply arrived in the world already in possession of a complete advanced scientific education and an engineering capability that no institution on Earth could have provided him. This points toward one of two conclusions. Either the rules of this universe include the possibility of beings born with complete advanced knowledge, in which case the question of why Stewie specifically is one of those beings is still open, or Stewie is not what he appears to be, and the appearance of infancy is a condition rather than a true state. The second conclusion has better support from the show's own evidence. There is a moment in a later season episode in which Stewie, asked by a school counselor to share his deepest secret, does something that the show frames as a joke, but that lands differently if you take it seriously. He removes his accent. Not the infant appearance, he cannot remove that, or chooses not to, but the vocal presentation, the distinctive British delivery that has defined him since his first scene, he takes it off. And the voice that emerges sounds like Peter Griffin. It sounds like a griffin from Rhode Island. It sounds like someone performing a character rather than expressing a nature. The show gives you this information and then pivots away. The counselor is alarmed. The scene moves on. But the image sits in memory. Stewie Griffin, taking off the British accent like a costume, filling a voice that sounds like it belongs to the family he has been pretending to be an infant genius inside of. The show asks you to notice this and then does not tell you what to do with it. The time machine's cosmological implications are even more extraordinary than the weapons. It has been used dozens of times across the show's run. Brian and Stewie have traveled to ancient Rome, to the far future, to parallel universes, to the period of the dinosaurs, and in the Season 9 episode, The Big Bang Theory, to the space outside the space-time continuum itself, the void that exists before all of physical existence, where the laws of physics do not apply and the concept of location is meaningless. In that episode, the time machine malfunctions outside the continuum. The return pad is overloaded. The explosion that results is the Big Bang. The cosmic background radiation that scientists use as evidence for the origin of the universe matches the signature of Stewie's return pad exactly. The episode states this clearly. Stewie created the universe, not as a metaphor, as a scientific fact within the show's established logic. Within the internal rules of Family Guy, Stewie Griffin, 1-year-old, fed applesauce from a high chair, wearing a football-shaped head and a yellow shirt, accidentally created all of physical existence. He is the reason there is a universe. He is the reason there is a Rhode Island. He is the reason there is a Spooner Street and a Griffin house and a nursery in that house with a nursery-colored ceiling. He built the container and then lived inside it. The show told you this once, in a Season 9 episode, and then moved on without ever returning to what it means. Stewie went back to being the show's emotional anchor and adventure companion. The cosmic dimension of his existence was noted and filed and left. Nobody in the show's universe ever told him what he had done. Nobody connected the Big Bang to the time machine. No character sat in a quiet moment and said, "You made everything. You are the reason any of this exists." He is 1-year-old. He wears a diaper. He made the universe, and the weapons are still there, in the nursery, behind the panel, or beneath the floor. The laser cannon, and the mind control device, and the shrink ray, and the weather machine, and the time machine that started everything. Stewie's character has softened across the show's later seasons. The evil genius persona faded. The attempts on Lois's life became rare and then stopped. The world domination plots became vestigial rather than central. But the weapons were not destroyed or permanently decommissioned. The nursery is the same nursery. The address is the same address. The house is the same house. The most powerful arsenal in the show's universe, built by the being who created the universe, is sitting in a crib room in New England, one deliberate choice away from being deployed. The child who built it is watching his family move through their days in the world he made, eating his applesauce, taking his naps, carrying the knowledge of what he did outside the space-time continuum and choosing, every single day, not to tell anyone. The question of who can understand Stewie is the show's most prolonged and most discussed continuity failure, and I want to give it real time because its failure is more interesting than it first appears. In the early seasons, the rule seemed clear. Almost nobody understood Stewie. Brian was the exception. The show established early and consistently that Brian could hear and interpret Stewie's meaning, while other characters received only the sound of a baby making sounds. This made the early comedy work in a very specific register. Stewie could threaten Lois's life directly to her face, and she would smile and hand him his pacifier. The horror and the comedy were the same thing, a creature of that intelligence and that ambition operating in complete invisibility, audible but not heard. From season 2 onward, the rules began to blur. Peter responded to Stewie's remarks in ways that only made sense if he had heard and understood them. Chris had actual conversations with him. Strangers responded to his statements. Teachers interacted with him as a student who had said something specific. By the time the show was deep into its run, the original rule was functionally gone. Characters understood Stewie whenever a joke was funnier that way, and did not understand him whenever that was funnier. The executive producer Rich Apple offered a framework in 2015. Brian and sometimes Chris always understand Stewie, while Peter, Lois, and Meg mostly do not, with exceptions for comedic effect. Seth MacFarlane offered a different framework at a later Comic-Con panel. Everyone can hear and understand Stewie, but they dismiss what he says because he is a baby and adults do not take babies seriously. These two frameworks are not compatible with each other, and neither is compatible with everything the show has actually shown. The show has been inconsistent about this for so long and so thoroughly that the inconsistency itself has become the defining feature. There is no settled answer. There has never been a settled answer. The show has kept the question open because a settled answer would reduce the character's flexibility in a way the comedy could not afford. But the unfixed answer opens onto something more interesting than a comedy production note. If the rules around Stewie's comprehensibility are genuinely unstable, if they change based on conditions that nobody has ever fully articulated, then Stewie himself is subject to aspects of his own existence that he cannot predict or control. He does not know, with certainty, when he will be heard and when he will not. He does not know, in any given moment, whether his words are landing. He makes speeches and delivers monologues and plans, and threatens and confesses and offers, and sometimes the people he is talking to hear him, and sometimes they do not, and he has never been able to explain why. The most powerful being in the show's universe, who created the universe and who contains the weapons that could end it, does not know when people will be able to hear what he is saying. That is either the show's most extended and most productive accident, or it is the show's most quietly devastating piece of character work. Section 4. The Meg Griffin Conspiracy. Who is she? Really? Let us be clear about something before we enter this room. Meg Griffin is not mysterious in the way Stewie is mysterious. Stewie is mysterious because of what he is, because his nature raises questions about consciousness and power and the architecture of reality. Meg is mysterious because of what has been done to her, because the show has surrounded her with unresolved questions about identity and parentage and hidden capability, and then spent 25 years processing those questions as sources of contempt rather than curiosity. She is, in the deepest possible reading, the most human character the show has ever produced. She wants to be loved. She wants to be seen. She wants her family to be proud of her and her peers to include her and the world to register that she is there and that her presence has value. These are not exotic or unusual desires. They are the most basic desires that any person can have. And the show has punished her relentlessly for having them, for all 25 years of its run, without ever fully committing to the question of who she actually is underneath all the punishment. Start with her name, Megan Griffin. The full name appears rarely, used primarily by parents in moments of particular stress or formality. It was chosen to communicate her ordinariness. In a family with a Stewie and a Lois and a Brian, she is a Megan, common, slightly dated, a name that does not stand out. She was designed to be the unremarkable one. What the show kept accidentally revealing is that she is not unremarkable. She is extraordinary in a direction the show did not know how to develop, so it spent 25 years burying her in contempt instead. The father question is the concrete center of the Meg mystery, and it was introduced in the 3rd season and has never been closed. In Screwed the Pooch, Brian is on the stand in a court case about custody of his puppies. Peter is questioning him to demonstrate that Brian knows the Griffin children better than Peter himself does. Brian correctly answers questions about Chris and Stewie. Then Peter asks, "Who is Meg's real father?" Brian's answer is immediate and unambiguous. Stan Thompson. The courtroom hears this. Peter hears it. Lois, present, hears it. The audience hears it. Meg does not hear it. She is in the gallery with headphones on, listening to music, completely unaware that the central fact of her biological identity is being stated clearly within 5 feet of where she is sitting. The scene is structured as comedy, the irony of revelation happening in the presence of the person it most concerns, while that person remains entirely oblivious. It is also, if you take it seriously, one of the most quietly devastating moments in the show's history. Everyone in that room knows something about Meg that Meg does not know about herself. The secret has been held, apparently for years, by multiple people in her immediate family. It was treated as trivia in a courtroom demonstration. Nobody considered that it might matter to tell her. Stan Thompson. 2 syllables. No physical description, no backstory, no explanation of who he is or how Lois knows him or whether he knows Meg exists or whether Peter has confronted Lois or whether Lois ever considered telling Meg. The name is dropped into the scene and the scene moves on. The show never returns to it with the seriousness it demands. Then, in a later season episode, Brian makes a comment to Meg, implying she looks like Peter, that Meg physically resembles the man who the show has already told us is not her biological father. If Stan Thompson is Meg's father, Meg should not look like Peter. The show has given us 2 incompatible facts about the same character in separate episodes and has not acknowledged the incompatibility. 3 explanations are available. 1. The physical resemblance is coincidental, and Brian's comment is an observation rather than an implication of paternity. 2. Brian lied to Meg in the later episode to stop her from doing something self-destructive, and the show acknowledges elsewhere that Brian is capable of strategic dishonesty. 3. The writers of the 2 episodes were not tracking this detail carefully. All 3 are possible. None is satisfying. The mystery stands. Other fragments of Meg's identity have the same quality of introduced incompleteness. In a second season episode, a dream Chris has shows Meg having murdered a younger sibling. The scene is dismissed when Chris wakes up, saying it seemed so real. It is played as a joke about Chris's morbid imagination, but it places, briefly and without commitment, the possibility of violence in Meg's history. That beneath the ordinary, put-upon teenager, there is something extreme that the show keeps almost surfacing and then pulling back from. In a later season episode, Meg opens her school locker and there is a living baby inside it. The baby greets her excitedly, apparently accustomed to the locker as its normal environment. Meg shoves textbooks in the baby's face. The baby is never mentioned again. No episode references it. No character acknowledges it. It simply existed in the show's universe for one scene and then vanished, leaving behind only the mystery of what it was doing there and what it says about who Meg is. These moments, the secret father, the murdered sibling in a dream, the locker baby, the recurring suggestions of hidden darkness beneath the surface of a character the show treats as empty form a pattern. The show keeps finding Meg's edges and then retreating from them. It keeps discovering that she is more complicated than its treatment of her allows, and then choosing its treatment over its discovery. The Season 10 episode, Seahorse Seashell Party, is the closest the show ever came to genuinely examining what it had been doing. Trapped inside during a hurricane, Meg finally confronted her family directly. She told Peter what he had done to her. She told Lois what the mother had failed to be. She was specific, precise, and entirely correct. The accusations were not exaggerated. They were inventories of documented behavior. The scene had the weight of genuine reckoning. And then the episode ended with Meg choosing to go back to being the target. The show explained that without Meg, as the family's collective outlet, the other members turned on each other. Her suffering had a function. She accepted the function. She went back to being hurt so that the people who hurt her could maintain their stability. The message this sends, even wrapped in the show's default ironic distance, is the kind of message that does real damage if you sit with it. It says that some people exist to absorb the cruelty of the people around them, that absorbing that cruelty is a form of service, that the correct response to sustained mistreatment is to continue absorbing it, because the alternative The alternative of the abusers facing their own dysfunction is somehow worse. Whether the writers intended to say this or not, they said it. And the show returned to this endpoint more than once when given the opportunity to do something different with Meg. Every time it glimpsed the real Meg, the one who played saxophone with Lisa Simpson, the one who forgave Peter in a moment of genuine emotional honesty, it stepped back and reassembled the punching bag. The real Meg Griffin is buried underneath 25 seasons of chosen contempt. The mystery of who she is and what she could have been is the most persistent and the most painful, unanswered question in the show's entire run. Not because it is the most cosmologically complex, but because it is the most human. She is a girl who wanted to be known. The show spent a quarter-century demonstrating that it was not interested in knowing her. And the questions the show planted about her origins and her history and her hidden capabilities are still sitting there, unanswered, because answering them would have required treating Meg Griffin as if she mattered. She does. The mystery of her is proof of that, even if the show never was. Section 5. Peter Griffin's Missing Years: The Mystery of a Man Who Should Not Exist. Here is a simple and verifiable fact about the central character of Family Guy. For the first 43 years of his life, he did not know who he was. Not in the metaphorical sense that affects people who are searching for meaning or purpose. In the literal documentary birth certificate sense. The man who sits at the head of the Griffin family dinner table every episode does not have a settled, consistent, truthful account of his own origins. He was given a story about himself that was partly fabricated, and the parts of the truth he eventually learned were processed in single episodes and then absorbed into the general noise of the show without changing his fundamental relationship with his own history. Peter Lowenbroy Griffin, yes, that is his legal name, confirmed by a reference to his birth records in the episode Quagmire's Mom, was raised as the son of Francis Griffin and Thelma Griffin. Francis was an Irish-American Catholic man of considerable rigidity, whose relationship with God was intimate and whose relationship with his son was characterized by a consistent, affectionate contempt. He was not a warm father. He was not a kind husband. He was difficult in the specific way that deeply religious men who believe their difficulty is a form of righteousness can be difficult. He disapproved of Lois from the beginning and expressed this disapproval with the regularity of a natural event. His final words to Peter, delivered from a hospital bed after being crushed by his own son during a birthday party unicycle routine, were that Peter was a fat, stinking drunk. He died as he had lived, in full disappointment. In the grief episode that followed Peter's two dads from season 5, Brian encourages Peter to see a hypnotherapist. The sessions surface a layered, buried memory. Francis, on multiple occasions across Peter's childhood, telling him explicitly that he was not his real father. Not a hint or a subtext. A direct statement repeated. Francis knew. He had always known. He had chosen to raise Peter anyway, had chosen to say nothing to Peter about it, and then in moments of particular stress or anger had said the thing he was not supposed to say and then resubmerged it before it could take root. Peter suppressed it each time. The sessions retrieve the full buried record. Peter goes to his mother, Thelma, and she confirms it. She had an affair while vacationing in Ireland with a man whose name she gives as Mickey McFinnigan. He lives in a village called McSwiggan. He is, she tells Peter without much elaboration, the town drunk. Peter and Brian fly to Ireland. They find Mickey in McSwiggan. He looks almost exactly like Peter, the same physical architecture, the same broad build, the same face except for a distinctive red beard and an Irish accent. The show mines this for every piece of Irish stereotype it can locate, and then gives Peter and Mickey a reconciliation via a drinking contest that Peter wins, thus proving to Mickey's satisfaction that they share blood. The episode ends warmly. The mystery that this resolution opens, and that the show never revisits, is what it means for the entire history of the show that Peter's last name does not belong to him biologically. Peter Griffin has been Peter Griffin for 25 years. Griffin is the name on his driver's license, his marriage certificate, his children's birth certificates, his employment records at the brewery, and before that at the toy factory. The Griffin name is his identity, and the Griffin name belongs to Francis, the man who raised him but did not father him. Peter's biological last name would be McFinnigan. He is Mickey McFinnigan's son. This creates a specific and significant problem for the show's own historical mythology. Untitled Griffin Family History. A Season 4 episode depicts the Griffin family ancestors across different historical periods. Among them is Nate Griffin, an enslaved black man in the antebellum American South, presented as Peter's direct ancestor, the source of the African heritage that the show attributes to the Griffin family line. This is established and treated as genuine family history. Nate Griffin is Peter's ancestor. But if Peter's biological father is Mickey McFinnigan, then Nate Griffin is not Peter's ancestor. The Griffin bloodline, the one that runs from Nate through the generations to Francis, is not Peter's bloodline. Peter's bloodline is McFinnigan. Nate Griffin is the ancestor of people who share Francis Griffin's blood. Peter does not share Francis Griffin's blood. The show has never addressed this. The Griffin family history episodes exist in the same continuity as the Peter's Two Dads revelation, and the incompatibility between them is simply never acknowledged. This is either a significant oversight that multiple people in the writing room failed to catch, or it is the show operating on a concept of family that privileges the bonds of choice and nurture over the facts of biology. In that reading, Nate Griffin is Peter's ancestor because Francis chose to raise Peter as his son, and the Griffin lineage is meaningful not because of DNA, but because of the decision to pass the name on. That is actually a generous and emotionally defensible reading. The show has never articulated it. The contradiction just sits there, available to anyone who looks. Peter was born in Mexico. This detail, revealed in the Season 6 episode Padre de Familia, establishes that Thelma Griffin traveled to Mexico to obtain an abortion that did not take, and Peter was born there. He is technically a natural-born Mexican citizen who has been living in the United States his entire adult life. The episode mines this for immigration comedy and then deposits the fact in the show's continuity without further interrogation. What this means is that the main character of Family Guy, who presents himself as a quintessential American working-class man from New England, was born in Mexico, fathered by an Irishman, raised under a false last name, in a country that is not his country of birth. His identity is layered with legal and biographical facts that the show introduced and did not follow through on. His age does not add up either. In Meet the Quagmires, set in approximately 1984, Peter is depicted as roughly 18 years old. If the show takes place in the present and Peter was 18 in 1984, he should be somewhere in his late 50s. The show has variously described him as 42, 43, or in his mid-40s, which does not align with a 1984 birth year if the show's timeline has any consistency. The show's floating timeline means character ages are never meant to be taken literally, but Peter specifically misaligns in a way the show acknowledges and jokes about, suggesting an awareness of the inconsistency without any willingness to resolve it. Who is Peter Griffin? His legal name comes from a man who was not his father. His biology comes from a man he met once in an Irish pub. His country of birth is Mexico. His ancestry, as presented by the show, traces through a bloodline he does not biologically belong to. His age does not add up. His family history is assembled from fragments that do not form a coherent whole. He is a man made of contradictions, living an uncomplicated life inside them, never particularly curious about any of it. Whether that incuriosity is a character trait evidence of the specific kind of unreflective comfort that allows a person to live inside a constructed identity without questioning its construction, or simply the show's refusal to think about it more deeply than it already has, is itself a mystery. The man at the center of the show has never been curious about the center of himself. He probably never will be. The questions about him accumulate in the background of every episode he appears in, unanswered and unasked, while he eats his cereal and watches his television and drives his car to a job at a brewery whose history he has never investigated, and comes home to a family whose origins he has received in fragments and never assembled into a whole. Section 6. The cutaway dimension: are these memories, dreams, or something else? Let us step back from the characters and look at the architecture of the show itself, because there is a mystery embedded in how the show tells its stories that is as interesting as any of the character mysteries we have walked through. Family Guy is built on the cutaway gag. The format is this. A character says something, "This is worse than the time." This reminds me of when, and the screen cuts to an entirely different scene. A short, disconnected sequence plays out, usually absurd and often dark. The show cuts back. The main story continues. This format has been present since the show's very first episode and has been its most discussed and most imitated feature for the entire 25 years of its run. But here is the question that becomes unavoidable if you think about the cutaways carefully from inside the show's universe rather than from outside it. What are they? Not formally, not structurally, not in terms of what they accomplish for the comedy. What are they in the world of the show? When Peter Griffin says, "This reminds me of the time I did something ridiculous," and the screen cuts to Peter doing something ridiculous in a completely different setting, is that a memory? Is it a fantasy? Is it something the characters are experiencing, or is it something we are experiencing that they are not? The early seasons treated cutaways as essentially memories. Peter references something that happened. We see the thing that happened. It is funny because it is absurd. The humor depends on the implicit claim that this actually happened, that this is part of Peter Griffin's genuine lived experience, that his life has actually contained this specific ridiculous moment, and that he has accumulated enough of them to draw on them as conversational illustrations. The comedy is character-specific. Peter's cutaways illuminate his particular quality of stupidity. Brian's illuminate his particular quality of pretension. Stewie's illuminate the specific gap between his lethally serious self-presentation and the absurdity of his actual situation. In the early seasons, the cutaways feel earned because they feel like they belong to the characters who introduce them. They are fragments of genuine personal history, exaggerated for effect. But then, gradually, the connection loosened. By the middle seasons and definitively by the later ones, the cutaways began to show things that could not be memories of any character in the scene. Historical periods outside any character's lifetime. Events from perspectives that no character in the scene could have access to. Scenarios that are temporally or geographically impossible given everything else the show has established about its world. A character says, "This reminds me of the time," and what follows is not a memory. It cannot be a memory. It is something else, and the show has never said what. The most revealing moment the show ever had about its own cutaway format comes in Back to the Pilot, when Brian and Stewie travel to the events of the 1999 pilot episode. During their visit, a cutaway from that episode is visible happening in the background of a scene, but the characters from the pilot are not inside the cutaway. They are standing around in the main scene, waiting for it to end, not experiencing it, not participating in it. The cutaway is happening to the episode, not to the characters. This is either a self-aware comedy bit about the show's format, which it certainly is, or it is the show revealing, in a background joke, the actual cosmological status of the cutaways within its universe. They are not experienced by the characters. They exist in a register of reality that the characters are not subject to. They happen around the inhabitants of the show's world without those inhabitants being present for them. If the characters do not experience the cutaways are not memories. They are not part of anyone's personal history. They are something the show's universe contains alongside the characters, something that runs parallel to the main story without being accessible from inside it. What are they then? The simulation theory offers the cleanest answer. Subroutines. Brief processes that run parallel to the main simulation thread, generating alternative scenarios, historical possibilities, exploratory variations. When a character says, "This reminds me of the time," they are not accessing personal memory. They are invoking a process. The process runs. Its results are visible to observers outside the simulation, meaning us, the audience, but not to the characters inside it. The characters trigger the process through their speech and then stand around, waiting while it completes. This reading would explain why cutaways can show things that are temporally or biographically impossible for the characters invoking them. The subroutines draw from the full dataset, not from the limited archive of what any specific character actually experienced. They can access historical periods, alternate possibilities, the interior of spaces no character has visited. They are queries running against a complete database, returning results that the querying character never actually lived. It also provides the most interesting reading of the Conway-Twitty gag, the recurring bit in which a character's setup line leads not to a joke, but to an unedited performance of a Conway-Twitty song. Running at full length, with no punchline, no comedic twist, nothing to indicate that the show is doing something other than simply playing country music for an extended period. The gag was widely criticized as evidence of creative laziness. But in the simulation reading, it is something different, an error state. The trigger phrase invoked a subroutine that failed to generate coherent content. The failure mode ran visibly. Raw signal, empty output, a country singer performing in the space where a joke should have been. The show did not decide to be lazy. The simulation glitched. And what appeared on screen was the glitch itself, which is arguably the most honest and transparent thing the show ever produced. The multiverse established in Road to the Multiverse adds another dimension to the cutaway question. Stewie's interdimensional teleporter allows access to parallel universes, infinite variations on the basic world of the show, each with different parameters. In one universe, humans evolved from dogs. In another, the aesthetic rules of old Disney animation apply. In another, the technology has advanced incomprehensibly. The multiverse is infinite. Each universe is real, from inside it. Every possible variation on the Griffin family's world exists somewhere. If the cutaways are windows brief, involuntary openings into parallel versions of the show's world rather than memory fragments from this version, then the content of the cutaways is true. It happened. Just in a different universe, a universe where that particular consequence of that particular choice had room to play out. When Peter says, "This reminds me of the time," he is not remembering something. He is briefly perceiving a parallel reality in which something like what he is describing actually occurred, in a version of his world where different choices produced different events. This reading would explain both the connection to character and the disconnection from established history. The cutaways feel like things the characters might have done because they are things the characters did in one of the infinite variations of their world. But they are not things these specific characters, in this specific universe, did, which is why they can show events that contradict the established timeline. What the show built with its cutaway format, whether intentionally or not, is a window into infinite possibility. Every time the screen cuts to a disconnected scene, the show is briefly opening a view onto a version of its world that exists in the multiverse, showing you something that is both real and not quite real, both connected to the characters and not quite theirs. It is the most cosmologically ambitious comedy format in the history of American television, and the show arrived at it, apparently, mostly by accident. The window is still open. It has been open since 1999. Whatever is on the other side, memory, parallel universe, simulation subroutine, error state in the code, it is still there. The show built the window and then forgot why, and then filled it with so much material for so long that the original mystery got buried. But the mystery is there. It was always there. You just have to look past the volume of what it produced to see the strangeness of what it is. Section 7. The Impossible Life of Glenn Quagmire. There is a man who lives at 29 Spooner Street, one house down from the Griffins, and his driver's license says he was born in 1948. The episode Foxy Lady from Season 7 is where this information surfaces. Peter reads the birth year off Quagmire's license, processes the arithmetic, and realizes the implication. Born 1948. That makes Quagmire 61 years old at the time of the episode. Quagmire does not look 61. He has never looked 61 in any episode of the show across its 25-year run. He has the physical appearance of a man in his mid-30s, maybe late 30s on a bad day. When Peter asks about the discrepancy, how can you be 61 when you look 35? Quagmire offers a single-word explanation: carrots. The carrot answer is the show's acknowledgement that it placed a piece of information into its universe that it does not want to explain and will not try to. It is the show saying, yes, we see the problem, here is the smallest possible gesture toward addressing it, and now we are going to move on and never come back to this. Whether there is anything real underneath the carrot, non-explanation is a question the show has chosen permanently not to answer. The 61-year-old question becomes most acute when placed alongside the Meet the Quagmires episode, set in approximately 1984, in which young Quagmire is depicted as essentially the same age as young Peter and young Lois, roughly 18. If Quagmire was born in 1948 and the scene is set in 1984, he would have been 36 at the time. The show depicts him as 18. The discrepancy is almost 20 years. Seth MacFarlane acknowledged the inconsistency and offered a resolution. Quagmire was inflating his age on his license to appear more experienced and mature to potential romantic partners. He is actually closer to Peter's age. The license is a lie. The carrots are irrelevant because the apparent youth simply reflects actual youth. This resolution technically closes the numerical problem, but it moves the question rather than answering it. If Quagmire has been lying about his age by 20 years on official identification documents, then something about the carrot explanation was itself a performance. A character deflecting attention from a real question with a joke answer, which is, appropriately, exactly what Glenn Quagmire does. And if the official documents contain a deliberate falsehood, what else in Quagmire's official presentation is constructed? His age, his service record, his licensing as an airline pilot, all of these involve documentation. If one of those documents is known to contain a fabrication, the question of what is real about any of them becomes legitimate. The deeper Quagmire mystery is not his age, it is his interiority. The show has, on rare occasions, and usually with the accidental honesty of a comedy that is trying to be funny and accidentally says something true, revealed more about what is actually happening inside Glenn Quagmire than it intends to. The Cheryl Tiegs backstory is the clearest example. Multiple episodes establish that Quagmire was once genuinely in love with a woman named Cheryl Tiegs, not the supermodel, but a specific woman with that name who appears to have been the single, serious romantic attachment of his adult life. He loved her. He lost her. The relentless womanizing that defines his public character is, the show acknowledges, a sustained attempt to fill the absence she left. He is not simply amoral. He is broken. He found what he actually wanted and then lost it, and the behavior that made him famous is what he does instead. The show gives you this backstory and then essentially does nothing with it. It mentions Cheryl Tiegs occasionally and does not develop her. It names the wound and does not probe it. Quagmire continues in his established patterns, and the information about his genuine past sits as a floating explanation that the show has not integrated. The photographs of Lois in Quagmire's house are another persistent, unexplored thread. Multiple episodes have established that Quagmire keeps photographs of his neighbor's wife in his private spaces, including on the inside of his closet door. These are not publicly available photographs. They are images obtained in ways that suggest sustained, directed attention. Quagmire has been collecting documentation of Lois for years and keeping it where only he can see it. This is framed as comedy about obsession. It is also, if you take it seriously, a fact about the relationship between Peter and Quagmire that should substantially complicate their friendship. Peter knows, or has reason to know, that one of his closest friends maintains a private archive of photographs of his wife. Peter has not found this to be a problem that requires addressing. The show has not found this tension interesting enough to develop. The speech Quagmire delivers to Brian in Jerome is the New Black is the most revealing thing the show ever did with this character, and it is revealing not primarily because of what it says about Brian, though it is precise and correct about Brian, but because of the intensity with which it is delivered. Quagmire does not complain about Brian the way you complain about a neighbor who parks in front of your house. He delivers a verdict. He has been watching. He has been cataloging. He has been waiting to say this for a long time. The question the scene raises is what the investment is. Why does Brian's hypocrisy specifically provoke this quality of response from Quagmire? The show frames it as a personality clash, old-fashioned guy versus pretentious progressive dog. But the intensity is not the intensity of a personality clash. It is the intensity of recognition. Quagmire sees something specific in Brian's self-deception that he has personal reason to find intolerable. As though this particular kind of fraud, the performance of virtue over a foundation of actual failure, is one that Quagmire has encountered very close to home, perhaps in himself. The show has never examined this. Quagmire remains, across 25 years, the character the show is least curious about in direct proportion to how interesting the evidence suggests he actually is. His age is wrong. His origin story is built on a lie. His signature behavior is a response to a specific loss he has never recovered from. His most intense emotional reaction is to a form of hypocrisy that he may recognize from personal experience. And he lives one house down from a woman whose photographs he keeps in his closet, whose husband is his best friend, and about whom he has apparently been having feelings for as long as the show has existed. All of this is the truth of Glenn Quagmire, accumulated across 25 seasons of a show that was always more interested in his punchlines than his depths. The mystery is not what any of it means. The mystery is why the show never looked at it directly. Section 8, Death, Resurrection, and the Rules Nobody Follows. In the second season of Family Guy, the Grim Reaper sprained his ankle in the Griffin family's front yacht between. He came to collect Peter Griffin's soul. Peter had died briefly after watching violent television, and Death arrived to complete the harvest. But Peter talked fast and managed to escape, and Death twisted his ankle in pursuit and went down hard on the Griffin property. Because he was injured and could not perform his duties, nobody in the world could die while he recovered. The mechanism of mortality was suspended. Biology continued past its intended endpoints. Peter, understanding the implications of this, began doing reckless things with the cheerful confidence of a man who has temporarily achieved genuine invincibility. The episode is called Death is a Bitch, and it is one of the funniest half hours the show ever produced. It is also the show's most explicit, direct statement about how its universe handles mortality, and the statement has been hovering over 23 additional seasons of the show without ever being fully reckoned with. If Death is a physical being who can sprain his ankle, who can be laid up in a guest room, who needs an ice pack, who has a personality and a voice actor, and a continuing relationship with the Griffin family that extends across multiple subsequent appearances, then death is an administered process. It is not a natural consequence of biological systems failing according to physical laws. It is a scheduled event that requires a specific entity to physically travel to the location of each death and be present for its completion. This entity can be incapacitated. When incapacitated, the schedule stops. What this means for the Griffin family specifically is difficult to calculate but impossible to ignore. They have had Death in their home. They hosted him during a period of incapacitation. They developed the kind of informal familiarity with him that comes from having someone in your guest room for a few days. You know how they take their coffee? You know what upsets them? They know where things are in your kitchen. The Griffins know Death, and Death knows the Griffins. And this relationship exists as a documented fact in the show's established continuity. Does the relationship confer anything? Does Death, when scheduling Peter Griffin's next death, which, based on the frequency with which Peter encounters genuinely lethal situations, should be a very full calendar look at the Griffin file with the particular accommodation that a professional might extend to a former host? The show never directly suggests this. But the question is legitimate because the show also established, in the same episode, that Death's personal condition directly affects the application of the rules he administers. He can be incapacitated, and an entity whose incapacitation suspends mortality for the entire world might also, out of gratitude or habit or simple professional courtesy, extend informal leniency to the family who gave him chicken soup while he was laid up. Peter Griffin should, by any realistic accounting of the show's depicted events, have died somewhere between 50 and several hundred times across the show's run. He has been involved in explosions, vehicle collisions of spectacular violence, falls from significant heights, encounters with dangerous animals, fires, crushing, drowning, and the sustained physical comedy of the later seasons in which the violence escalated from cartoon slapstick to something that pushed the line between exaggerated and genuinely graphic. He has survived all of it, usually by the next scene, sometimes within the same scene. The show uses cartoon physics to justify this survival, the Wile E. Coyote logic that animated bodies are resilient in ways real bodies are not. This is standard and uncontroversial in the context of animation, but the show also established with total seriousness that death is real and has a specific mechanism and applies to specific characters permanently. Francis Griffin stayed dead. Muriel Goldman stayed dead. Diane Simmons stayed dead. The show has applied permanent death to recurring characters in ways that clearly demonstrated the rules of mortality as real and consequential, which means the show is operating on selective mortality. Some characters are subject to the rules and some are not, and the selection has never been explained. The Griffin family, specifically, appears to occupy a protected category. They survive things that kill other characters. They do not stay dead when they die. The mechanism for this has never been articulated. Brian Griffin's death and resurrection is the sharpest test of these questions. In Life of Brian from season 12, he was hit by a car in the driveway of the family home. The death was presented as final and serious. The family mourned him. New arrangements were made. 2 episodes later, Stewie used the time machine to travel back and prevent the death from occurring. Brian was undied. The timeline was revised. The family retained no memory of the loss. The time machine was available in the nursery when Brian died. It was available during the 2 episodes of his death. It has been used dozens of times for much smaller stakes than undoing the death of the person Stewie loves most. The question of why it took 2 episodes for Stewie to use it is not answered by the show. But the deeper question is this: why did Stewie use it then and not before, and not since? Muriel Goldman was strangled. Going back and preventing the strangulation is within Stewie's established capabilities. Francis Griffin was crushed by his son at a birthday party. Removing the unicycle from the situation requires 5 minutes of time travel. Every death the show has treated as permanent was a death that Stewie could have reversed and chose not to. The selective deployment of the time machine as a mortality reversal tool applied once to Brian and not to anyone else has never been examined as an ethical question. Stewie went back for Brian because Brian was the person whose absence he could not accept. This is how love works. It mobilizes resources that otherwise remain dormant. The time machine was always capable of reversing deaths. Stewie was always capable of using it that way. Brian's death was the first death that made the stakes high enough to actually use it. What this means, silently, is that every other permanent death in the show, every character the show has killed off and maintained as dead, was a death that Stewie could have prevented and did not. He has the power to reverse mortality. He has used it once. Everyone else who died because Stewie did not love them enough to go back. The show has never looked at this from this angle. The moral weight of having death reversal technology and choosing not to use it for anyone except your closest friend is enormous, and it sits entirely unexamined in the background of every episode that aired after Christmas Guy. The show's God character appears physically in multiple episodes and is present, accessible, and invested in specific earthly events, football outcomes among them. As established in the 3 Acts of God episode, Peter and his friends travel the world and meet God directly. He gives them an audience. He makes a deal with them. If death is a physical entity and God is a physical entity, both accessible from the same fictional Rhode Island town, then the hierarchy governing mortality in the show's universe is specific. God above death, death above biological life. With the Griffin family existing in some informal relationship to all of these rules that the show has never coded explicitly, something is keeping them alive. Something has been doing this for 25 years. Whether that something is death's gratitude, God's investment, Stewie's maintenance, or just the show's refusal to commit to its own consequences, the effect is the same. The Griffins survive. And the universe around them, which contains the mechanisms to end them, has not. Section 9. The Unsolved Lois Griffin, A Life of Buried Secrets. Here is how much attention the show has paid to Lois Griffin across its 25 years. She has appeared in every episode. She has been the stable center of the household. She has been given moments of genuine comedy and occasional moments of real emotional depth and a consistent, patient, slightly exhausted presence through all of it. She is the pole the tent is organized around. Here is how deeply the show has actually examined her. Not deeply enough, not in proportion to what it has established about her history, not in proportion to what the show has revealed piece by piece across 2.5 decades about the family she came from and the accumulated weight of what that family has required her to carry. Lois Patrice Griffin was born Lois Patrice Pewterschmidt, and the Pewterschmidt name is where her mystery begins and where it keeps building. Because the Pewterschmidt family is one of the most consistently unsettling presences in the show's background, and the show has never committed to examining what it has established about them. Her father, Carter Pewterschmidt, owns U.S. Steel and Pewterschmidt Industries and exercises influence at levels of American political and economic life that the show references without fully mapping. He is a billionaire. He is, by the show's consistent characterization, gleefully sadistic toward Peter, contemptuous of people he considers beneath him, and capable of extraordinary cruelty toward his own family when circumstances invite it. He keeps what appears to be a rancor, a creature from the Star Wars universe, in a pit beneath his mansion. This is played as a joke and never explained. In the 19th century, his family enslaved Peter's ancestor, Nate Griffin, a detail inserted into a flashback episode and never revisited in proportion to its significance. In one episode, Woken from Sleep, Carter mumbles something about taking Lois's temperature. The line's ambiguity is extreme enough that a generous reading finds nothing, and an ungenerous reading finds something very disturbing. The show does not return to it. The implication is left in the scene like a piece of evidence from a crime that has not yet been named. What is certain is that Lois did not have a warm childhood. She grew up in wealth and in the specific emotional coldness that certain kinds of wealth produce. Her nanny was the primary source of genuine affection in her early life, not her parents, but an employee. This nanny was fired by Carter after his affair with the nanny's sister came to light. The person who taught Lois what being cared for felt like was removed from her life by her father's infidelity. Lois, as a child, could not have been told the true reason. Adults do not typically explain their affairs to the children who are collateral damage from them. She experienced a loss whose real cause she was presumably never given. This is the kind of early experience that shapes how a person understands the reliability of attachment. It tells a child something about whether the warmth offered by the people who claim to love you will last, or whether it is contingent on factors outside the child's control or knowledge. The show provides this backstory in a single episode and does not develop it. Patrick Pewterschmidt is where the Pewterschmidt family history becomes genuinely alarming. Patrick is Lois's brother. She did not know he existed until she was an adult. He had been institutionalized in a mental facility by Carter and Barbara Pewterschmidt for 30 years, a fact they concealed from Lois for the entirety of that period. His institutionalization was the result of a childhood trauma involving his mother and the comedian Jackie Gleason. The show frames this as absurdist comedy, which it is, but the baseline fact is stark. A parent experienced a trauma, had a breakdown, and was institutionalized by his parents. And those parents constructed a version of the family's history in which he did not exist, and maintained that construction for 30 years while Lois grew up believing she was an only child. Carter Pewterschmidt hid his son from his daughter for 30 years. He told Lois she had no brother. For 30 years, while Patrick was alive and institutionalized and presumably visited by someone, while the bills for his care were being paid, while his existence was a continuous fact, Carter and Barbara simply chose not to tell Lois. They constructed a family history without him and maintained it perfectly for 3 decades. What kind of household was that? What was it like to grow up in a family where a sibling had been concealed and the concealment was maintained with flawless coordination by both parents? What did Lois feel when she eventually found out about the 30 years she had been given a false picture of her own family? The episode in which Patrick is discovered focuses on the comedy of his subsequent behavior. The emotional aftermath for Lois is acknowledged briefly and not given serious time. Barbara Pewterschmidt is the show's most underexamined character in proportion to what the show has placed in her history. In Family Guy, it is revealed that Barbara is not Protestant. She is Jewish specifically. She is a Jewish Holocaust survivor who survived the genocide and then chose to conceal both her Judaism and the fact of her survival from everyone around her, including her daughter, for the rest of her life. She raised Lois in a Protestant household. She allowed Lois to claim a religious and ethnic identity that was not Lois's complete identity. She kept the most formative and traumatic experience of her existence entirely private from her own child. What was Barbara protecting? Was she protecting herself from the pain of returning to that period? Was she protecting Lois from the weight of inheriting the history of a genocide? Was she protecting a social position she believed disclosure would threaten? The episode acknowledges the question and does not answer it. Barbara remains primarily a background character, occasionally funny, the depth of her history present but not engaged with. Lois processed these revelations, Patrick's existence and institutionalization, Barbara's hidden identity and its implications, Carter's infidelity and what it cost her childhood in the off-screen space between episodes, the space where the show never looks. Each revelation was given an episode and then absorbed into the baseline. The next episode, Lois was making breakfast again. There is a line she delivers in A Bottle episode that the show uses as a joke, but that reads differently if you carry her full history into it. Under stress, she describes herself as a secret little psycho with very little to lose. It is meant to be funny. Given everything the show has placed in her past, the early loss, the hidden brother, the hidden mother, the father, and his murky relationship with her childhood, the decades of managing a household built on Peter's chaos while carrying all of this, the line is less ironic than it initially appears. She has organized all of it into a functional domestic life through an act of sustained will that is never fully acknowledged. The most unsolved mystery about Lois Griffin is not about any specific secret in her past. It is about what it costs a person to know as much as she knows and still be who she is every morning, in the same house, with the same people, starting over. The show has given her the history that would produce a person of extraordinary psychological complexity and then ask that person to keep making breakfast. The cost of the keeping is never counted. And in not counting it, the show has left open, permanently, the question of what is actually happening inside the woman at the center of the show that the center of the show has never looked at directly. Section 10. Cleveland, Joe, and the Abandoned Storylines. There are stories on this show that were told halfway and then stopped. Not because the material ran out and not because the writers made a conscious decision to close the thread. They stopped because the structure of a long-running animated comedy cannot sustain genuine consequence without threatening the baseline configuration that keeps the show operational. Characters can change within episodes. They cannot stay changed between them without threatening the format that allows the show to keep producing episodes indefinitely. And so the changes that begin in episodes get quietly reversed in the spaces between them, and the stories that were started end up somewhere they were not intending to go, which is nowhere. Cleveland Brown is the clearest example of a character whose accumulated history has never been properly absorbed by the show. In the early seasons, Cleveland was Peter's most genuinely likable friend. Where Peter was chaotic and Quagmire was predatory in his self-presentation, and Joe was compressed intensity, Cleveland was measured, patient, quietly dignified. His friendship with Peter was the warmest in the group, grounded in genuine mutual affection rather than the shared habit of proximity that characterized the other relationships. He was the friend you would actually want. Loretta's affair with Quagmire disrupted all of this. The show processed the disruption in a single episode and then allowed the friendships to continue substantially unchanged because the Spooner Street friendship group is the structural requirement of the show and cannot be permanently disassembled. Cleveland forgave Quagmire, or functionally behaved as though he had, and the group continued. Then Cleveland got a spin-off. The Cleveland Show ran from 2009 to 2013. Cleveland moved to Virginia, married a new woman, built a new life with new friends in a new town over 4 full seasons. He had a different daily texture, different problems, different relationships. When the spin-off ended and Cleveland returned to Spooner Street, he brought his new wife and her children with him and was reintegrated into the original show. What the show did not do was examine what 4 years of separate life had done to him. Cleveland returned as essentially the same Cleveland, slotted back into the same social position, his Virginia years available as backstory material without being integrated as formative experience. He had built a complete second life and then left it, and the leaving was not examined. Loretta had died during the spin-off a heart attack, handled with some abruptness, and the death was noted in Family Guy and then moved past. Cleveland had genuinely loved Loretta. Her betrayal with Quagmire was the most significant interpersonal wound of his depicted adult life. Her death meant that reconciliation was permanently unavailable, that the wound would never get an honest reckoning. The show moved on. Joe Swanson is organized around a different shape of abandoned story, a lie about a foundational event, corrected and then not integrated. Joe was paralyzed by an injury sustained in the line of duty. In his first appearance, he tells the story: Christmas Eve, an orphanage robbery, a rooftop pursuit, a roller skate, a fall. The perpetrator he was chasing was the Grinch, a fictional character from A Christmas Story. Joe was paralyzed chasing the Grinch. The show presents this with straight-faced absurdism, which is the show's characteristic register for the most outlandish of its character details. In Season 11, Joe confesses that the Grinch story was fabricated. The real story, an undercover narcotics investigation, a criminal named Bobby Briggs who discovered Joe's cover, a shooting that left him in the wheelchair. The Grinch story was a construction, a replacement for circumstances that were, for reasons Joe has never fully articulated, unsuitable for sharing with the people closest to him. This revelation is genuinely interesting as character work. Joe lied to his 3 closest friends about the central event of his life, not in a small embellishment but in a wholesale replacement of reality, and maintained the lie for years. What was he protecting? The truth is not obviously more shameful than the fiction being shot while undercover on a narcotics operation is not less heroic than being paralyzed chasing a cartoon villain. Something in the actual circumstances was too close, too painful, or too complicated to share as is. The Grinch story was easier. The episode reveals the lie. Joe's friends absorb it, and the show moves on. What the revelation means for the relationships, for the shared history these men have had, in which they thought they knew this foundational thing about Joe, and now understand they did not, is not explored. The emotional weight of the correction is felt for approximately one scene and then set aside. Kevin Swanson, Joe's son, was reported killed in action during military service. He reappeared alive in a Thanksgiving episode and revealed he had deserted. He had been listed as dead because his desertion had been classified or reported that way. He came home on a holiday. Joe, who is both his father and a sworn law enforcement officer, for whom military desertion carries specific professional as well as personal weight, had to process both his son's survival and his son's crime simultaneously. The show handled this with a light touch and then did not return to it. Kevin came back. Joe was glad. The moral and legal complexity of a police officer's son being a military deserter in the household of a man whose entire identity is built around institutional loyalty and the rule of law was acknowledged briefly and then absorbed. The show moved on. The pattern here is the same as in all the abandoned storylines. Something real is introduced, something that would change the people involved, if they were real people and if the show had the patience to let it. The change is acknowledged briefly. The show resets. The characters return to their assigned positions in the format. These abandoned storylines are not failures of imagination. The show had the imagination to introduce them. They are failures of commitment, an inability or unwillingness to follow through on what was started. And the accumulated mass of them, the dozens and dozens of started and stopped stories across 25 years of episodes, tells you something about the show's deepest limitation. It was always more comfortable with the implications of its own events than with those events actually being metabolized by the characters they happen to. The friendships on Spooner Street persist across all of it. People who have done terrible things to each other and never honestly reckoned with those things continue to choose each other's company. There is something both consoling and unsettling about this. Consoling because it suggests that friendship can survive what we do to each other and what we fail to do. Unsettling because it suggests that the friendships are maintained by something other than honesty, by habit, by proximity, by the convenience of people who have always been there. The abandoned storylines are where the show comes closest to telling you the truth about these people. They are the moments the show got too close to something real and stepped back. The truth is still there, in the unfinished business, in the questions that were asked and not answered. The truth has always been there, in the spaces between the jokes, waiting for someone to be willing to sit in it long enough to hear it. Section 11. The town itself? An impossible geography? Let us talk about the town. The fictional municipality in Rhode Island where the Griffin family lives has never been a coherent place. It has been a set of associated images, a particular kind of New England street with colonial houses and large old trees, a corner bar with the name Drunken Clam on the sign above the door, a pier area near water, a high school named after an actor, a local news studio, a pharmacy, a church or two, the Pewterschmidt estate at some remove from the main residential area. These images have been arranged into the suggestion of a place across hundreds of episodes over 25 years. But the arrangement changes. The spatial relationships between the images shift. The distances contract and expand. The same locations connect to different locations in different episodes, and the connections the show establishes in one season are ignored or contradicted in the next. This is mostly the ordinary imprecision of animation production at the scale and duration of this show. A team producing 20-plus episodes per season over 25 years, with different art directors and different reference sheets in different periods, is going to produce visual environments that are inconsistent with each other. The interior of the Griffin house cannot have a consistent floor plan when no one is maintaining a single authoritative architectural document across hundreds of productions spread over decades. The inconsistency is real, and it is mostly mundane, but the show's relationship with its own geographical instability goes further than simple production inconsistency. In Back to the Pilot, when Brian and Stewie visit the 1999 version of the show, the world they arrive in is visually distinct from the current world in ways that they register. The 1999 house is a different house. The 1999 town has a different palette. The spatial world of the pilot is the spatial world of the pilot and not of the current season, And Brian and Stewie perceive this as a form of difference, the way a traveler perceives that they have arrived somewhere unfamiliar, similar in structure but wrong in specific detail. The show frames this as comedy, but its cosmological implication is clear. The world the show is set in has a version history. There was a 1999 version, and there are subsequent versions, and the current version is a later iteration of something that existed differently before. If the world has been updated, something has been doing the updating. The Griffin House carries this instability in concentrated form. The exterior is consistent enough to be recognizable across seasons, a particular color, a particular relationship to the adjacent properties, a particular configuration of windows and doors. The interior is not. Rooms change their positions. The basement is sometimes much larger than the exterior footprint of the house could support. The attic appears and disappears. Stewie's nursery connects to a weapons laboratory that would require a footprint nowhere accounted for in the house's exterior dimensions. If the house is a simulation rendered at the resolution required by each episode's story, with the weapons room existing in full when an episode needs the weapons room, and rendered merely as an implied presence at other times, with the basement as large as the plot needs it to be, without regard for structural constraints, then the inconsistency is not an error. It is the natural behavior of a rendered environment that does not maintain a complete state between uses. It regenerates each time it is needed, and each rendering is correct for its immediate purpose. But the renderings do not have to agree with each other. The background characters of the town are one of the show's most quietly unsettling, persistent details. Family Guy uses a limited rotating set of unnamed background figures for crowd scenes, the same nameless people appearing in the same positions across hundreds of episodes, filling the visual space of a populated community without ever being given names or dialogue or individual identities. The same man in a distinctive hat, the same woman in a yellow blouse, the same one-legged figure, several others. They have been there since the earliest seasons. They were at the bar in Season 2, they were in the park in Season 11, they are in crowd scenes in the current season. They have watched everything. They have been present for almost every public moment in the Griffin family's 25 years in this town. They were at every civic event, every town crisis, every public spectacle. They have been watching from the background of essentially every exterior scene the show has produced. They have no names, they have no voices, they have no stories, they are wallpaper. But wallpaper that has been accumulating information for 25 years is a different thing from wallpaper that was just hung. The background characters are the most temporally consistent presences in the show. More consistent than the geography, more consistent than the character backstories, more consistent than almost any other element of the show's universe. They are the silent witnesses to the entire history of the Griffin family as experienced by the community around them. If any set of entities in the show's universe knows the full truth about the Griffin family, how the neighborhood has perceived them, what the community has seen that the family has not noticed it seeing, what the accumulated history of Spooner Street looks like from the outside rather than from inside the house, it is these unnamed, voiceless figures who have been standing in the backgrounds of crowd scenes for a quarter century, watching. They cannot speak. The show will never give them a voice. But they are there, every time the camera pulls back far enough to show them, with the patient attention of people who have been in their positions for a very long time and have seen a great deal. The town's impossible geography is the most generalized expression of a quality that runs through the entire show. Things look stable from inside and reveal themselves as unstable from outside. The streets look like they should stay put, and they do not. The house looks like it should have consistent dimensions, and it does not. The family looks like it should have consistent histories, and they do not. The show looks like it should have resolved its own questions, and it has not. The instability is the show. It has always been the instability. Section 12. The final mystery: is any of it real? Let us sit in this last room for a while. We have been through the whole house now. We have walked through the nursery where the universe was accidentally made. We have sat at the kitchen table with the dog who should not exist. We have looked at the weapons behind the wall that were never disassembled. We have tracked the father who does not know his own name, the daughter whose real father has never been identified, the wife whose past is an accumulation of unreckoned revelations. We have sat with the abandoned stories, the impossible geography, the cutaways that happen to the show without being experienced by its characters. And the question that waits at the end of all of this is the question that contains all the others. Within the cineral logic of Family Guy within the universe, the show has constructed, piece by piece, episode by episode, across 25 years of a show that cared about its characters even when it was failing them. Is the life of the Griffin family a genuine, continuous, causally coherent reality, or is it something else? The evidence for something else has been accumulating across the entire walk. Let me gather it here, in this final room, and see what it looks like all together. Stewie Griffin can run simulations. This is established unambiguously by the Season 6 two-parter, Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie. In those episodes, Stewie killed his mother, conquered the world, and was then killed by a Lois who turned out to be alive. At the end, the reveal. Everything the audience just watched was a simulation on Stewie's computer. Brian had been inside it and experienced it as completely real. The cast of the show existed within it, behaving consistently with their established characters. The simulation was indistinguishable from lived experience by the people inside it. If Stewie can produce a simulation of that complexity and that detail as a contained project run on his personal computer in a nursery in Rhode Island, the question of what limits his simulation building capacity becomes central. The show provides no upper limit. His computing technology is beyond anything available in the contemporary world. His theoretical knowledge is comprehensive. There is no obvious ceiling on the scale of what he can construct. The main timeline of Family Guy could be a simulation Stewie set running at some point and has been maintaining since. Not a contained experiment, but an ongoing environment. The world he actually inhabits, designed by himself, populated with constructed versions of his family and their neighbors, updated periodically as his interests shift and his parameters change, running continuously. The inconsistencies in the show's continuity are, in this reading, maintenance artifacts. The Griffin house is larger on the inside than the outside because the simulation allocates more computational resources to the lived interior than to the viewed exterior. The geography shifts because the town is regenerated from stored parameters each time it is accessed, rather than persisting as a fixed structure between uses. The character ages float rather than advancing in real time because Stewie has set them to a preferred range. The cutaways are subroutines, brief parallel processes that run when triggered by specific speech patterns and produce results visible to observers outside the simulation. The reset buttons that follow emotional revelations, the moments where genuine character growth occurs in one episode and is reversed in the next, are Stewie returning the simulation to a preferred state. He has a preferred configuration for the Griffin family. He has a preferred version of each character. When episodes push characters beyond those preferred states through sustained emotional engagement, the next episode restores the baseline. The author of the simulation has preferences, and he enforces them. The Conway Twitty gag is an error state. The trigger phrase invoked a subroutine that returned null content. The failure mode ran visibly. The Big Bang revelation, Stewie's accidental creation of the universe through the overload of his return pad, is the deepest layer. If Stewie made the universe, then the simulation he is running is not running on a computer that exists within some larger prior universe. The computer exists within a universe that Stewie made. He is the creator of the physical substrate that his simulation runs on. He is simultaneously the author of everything and a character within his own creation, 1 year old, sitting in his high chair, watching the family he made move through the world he made, unable to tell them because no one inside the story can understand what the author is. He knows this. The Big Bang Theory episode established that he investigated and confirmed it. He knows he made the universe. He has known since that investigation, and he has been living with that knowledge alone, in the center of everything he made, surrounded by people who do not know and cannot know, and would not fully understand if they could, across every subsequent episode of the show's run. The 1-year-old baby in the yellow shirt and the diaper, sitting in the high chair, watching the simulation run. He built the weapons behind the nursery wall. He built the time machine that started everything. He built this town and this family and this light on Spooner Street that has never gone out. He built the unfinished novel on Brian's laptop, and the photographs in Quagmire's closet, and the children listening to music on headphones in courtrooms, and the mother carrying 30 years of secrets, and the father who does not know his own last name. He built all of it. He lives inside all of it. And nobody in all of it knows. That is either the most quietly devastating character premise in the history of animated television, or it is the accidental byproduct of a show that kept making reveals bigger and bigger until it painted itself into a cosmological corner and then walked away. It is probably both. Most extraordinary things are both intentional and accidental. Most profound things are made by people who were trying to do something else and stumbled into depth along the way. The show stumbled into enormous depth. It did not always know what to do with it. It sometimes walked away from what it found. But the depth is there. It has always been there. In the weapons room, in the unfinished novel, in the name on the courtroom record that Meg could not hear, in the age on the driver's license that was never explained, in the death that was undone and the deaths that were not, in the brother hidden for 30 years, and the mother whose Holocaust was a secret, and the father whose last name does not belong to him, the depth is there. The light on Spooner Street is still on. Someone put it on. Someone kept it on. And whatever that someone knows about why it has never gone out is the final mystery the show has been sitting next to for 25 years without quite facing. Close your eyes. Let the simulation run. It will be here when you wake up. It has always been here. It will keep being here. The author is in the house. The light is on. The questions have been there this whole time, waiting in every room you have ever watched them walk through. Some mysteries do not need to be solved to be complete. They just need to be fully seen. Before we fully close, a few final threads worth noting. The giant chicken has been fighting Peter Griffin in increasingly elaborate and increasingly meaningless battles since Season 2 over a coupon that had already expired. Neither of them has ever explained why they keep finding each other and doing this. The chicken has a wife. He has a job, presumably. He has a life that exists between confrontations with Peter. None of it is shown. He simply appears when the show needs him and engages in 15 minutes of escalating cartoon violence and disappears again. He has never been explained. He was probably never meant to be. But his persistent, unexplained, indefinitely continuing presence is one of the show's most honest depictions of how certain kinds of conflict actually work. Senseless, habitual, endless, and somehow not worth stopping. The family's legal relationship with death remains the show's most underexplored cosmological thread. They hosted him. They have ongoing acquaintance with him. They live in a universe where he is a physical entity who can be met, communicated with, and hospitalized. And the implications of all of this for how they live and die have been present in the background of every episode since Season 2, without being examined even once. Herbert the neighbor has been there the whole time, in the background of the neighborhood, never addressed. The show trusts the audience to hold what they understand about him while the characters behave as though he is simply a very friendly old man who likes teenagers. This is either the show's most extended and most uncomfortable joke, or its most extended and most accurate depiction of how communities handle uncomfortable truths about their members, by looking slightly to the side. The unfinished novel is still unfinished. The weapons are still there. The light is still on. It has always been on. If you made it through tonight truly, the whole walk we are grateful in a way that a closing paragraph cannot fully contain. You gave us hours of your night and your attention, and the particular quality of company that comes from sitting with difficult questions in comfortable darkness. Tell us which mystery stayed with you. Tell us which room we walked through that you are still thinking about. Tell us the time and the place you are watching from, and tell us your theory about the light on Spooner Street. The comment section is yours tonight. If this is your first time here at Uncle Guy Lore, welcome. We do this regularly long, slow, atmospheric walks through the worlds of animated shows, going further than most people think to go. If this felt like the right kind of company, subscribe before you fall asleep. It takes 1 second and it matters to us more than we usually say. Take care of yourself, sleep well, we will see you in the next one. Uncle Guy Lore https://www.com/@UncleGuyLore. Expansion Section 2 continued. The unfinished novel and what it really means. Let us spend a few more minutes with Brian's novel, because it deserves that time and the show never gave it. Faster Than the Speed of Love has been the defining symbol of Brian's interior life since the first season, not in spite of the fact that it has never been finished because of it. The novel's perpetual incompleteness is the truest thing about Brian Griffin. It is the gap between the person he believes himself to be and the person he has actually been willing to become. It is the thing he keeps saying he will do and the thing he keeps not doing. And the gap between those two things is where he actually lives. The show has given us fragments of the novel's content across its run. It appears to be semi-autobiographical. It has been described, in the episode The Shot Heard Round the World, as having a plot similar to the film Iron Eagle 3, which is a piece of information both characters use to mock Brian, because it suggests the literary novel he claims to be writing is actually a genre action-adventure story he is pretending has more depth than it does. Brian is not writing what he claims to be writing. He is writing something he is embarrassed to admit to and framing it as something he can be proud of. What Brian is actually trying to write, under the semi-autobiographical description and the disguised genre plot, is probably this: the story of a talking dog who is placed into the body of an animal by forces he does not understand and has spent his adult life trying to be taken seriously by people who will always, ultimately, see a dog rather than a person. The story of someone whose nature is so fundamentally strange that no existing social category fully contains him. The story of loving a family and being part of it, and also always being apart from it, in a specific and permanent way, because what he is does not match what they see when they look at him. That is the story Brian has been trying to write for 25 years. He has not finished it, because finishing it would require telling the truth about himself with a specificity and a vulnerability that he has never quite been able to reach. It would require saying, in completed prose rather than in the ongoing performance of intellectual identity, what it actually feels like to be Brian Griffin. And that is the one thing Brian Griffin has spent his entire life avoiding: the martinis, the opinions, the references to literature he may or may not have read, the performances of sophistication that Quagmire dissected with surgical accuracy in that Season 8 speech. These are not the behaviors of a person at peace with himself. These are the behaviors of someone who constructed a persona as protective architecture around something raw and exposed that he has never been willing to let anyone see directly. The novel is the direct line to that raw thing. Every time he does not finish it, he is choosing the performance over the truth one more time. And the show has maintained this for 25 years, this permanent, unresolved tension between who Brian performs himself to be and who he might actually be if he ever stopped performing, without ever arriving at the resolution that would require the performance to stop. What would it mean for Brian to finish the novel? Not for his career or his reputation or his relationship with the New Yorker. What would it mean for him? The show has never tried to find out. It is content with the incompleteness. The incompleteness is funnier, in the short term, than the completion would be. But 25 years of incompleteness stops being a character detail and starts being a statement. The novel will never be finished. Brian will never be fully known. The show placed this mystery at the center of its most relatable character and then committed to it permanently. That commitment is, in a way, the show's most honest creative decision. Real people carry unfinished projects inside them for decades. Real people construct performances of themselves that obscure the raw material underneath. Real people love imperfectly and are loved imperfectly and live in the gap between what they show and what they are. Brian Griffin's unfinished novel is the truest thing the show has ever said about being alive, and it said it by refusing to finish the thing. Expansion Section 3 continued. What happened to the evil genius? The evil genius baby is gone. That sentence is simple enough to say and complicated enough to spend real time with. The character who opened the show in 1999, the one-year-old Bond villain in a diaper, calmly discussing his plans to enslave humanity while his mother fed him his dinner, building laser cannons in his nursery, plotting against the woman who had no idea her baby wanted her dead, that character is not the character who appears in the show's current seasons. Something happened to him across the show's middle period, and what replaced him is functional and sometimes excellent and not the same thing. The transition happened gradually. In seasons 2 and 3, small cracks appeared in the evil genius facade. Stewie had moments of vulnerability. Small touches of femininity appeared. The relationship with Brian began to develop from its original master and pet dynamic into something more like genuine friendship. The writers were testing, cautiously, how far they could push Stewie in a softer direction while keeping the original character's energy intact. Then the show came back from cancellation in 2005, and the transformation accelerated. the world domination plots became less frequent. The attempts on Lois's life slowed. The elaborate weapons got fewer scenes. Instead, Stewie's storylines began to center on personal identity, on his relationship with Brian, on emotional needs and insecurities, rather than tactical objectives. The two-part Season 6 event, Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie, was, in retrospect, the farewell to the original character. In those episodes, Stewie finally achieved what he had been working towards since the first scene of the first episode. He killed Lois, took over the world, became the dictator he had always planned to be. It was thrilling and dark and genuinely earned by the years of build-up. And then it was revealed to be a simulation. None of it had happened. And after those episodes, the world domination plots became rare enough to count on one hand, and the murder attempts on Lois essentially stopped, and the Stewie who continued in the seasons that followed was a fundamentally different character wearing the same clothes. The argument the writers made for this change, that the evil baby joke had been taken as far as it could go, that they had exhausted the premise, does not hold up under examination. The show went on to run 15 more seasons with the gentler version of Stewie, which means it found enough material for 15 seasons of the replacement character. The argument that the original character was exhausted collapses when you consider that 15 seasons of an alternative approach were produced. If the alternative could sustain 15 seasons, the original could have too. What actually happened is that the writers found the evil genius premise emotionally limiting. You cannot do certain kinds of character work with a character whose fundamental motivation is world domination and matricide. You cannot have him form genuine friendships, because genuine friendship requires a kind of vulnerability that a cartoonish villain is not supposed to have. You cannot have him grow, because growth implies that the person being cartoonish about villainy was always a performance rather than a nature, which retroactively reframes everything the character did before as something other than what it appeared to be. The transition produced excellent television in certain specific ways. The Stewie and Brian friendship, which required a softer Stewie to develop past its original master and pet terms, produced some of the show's most emotionally resonant moments. Brian and Stewie, the Season 8 episode that locked them in a bank vault and stripped away every comedic buffer in their relationship, is one of the finest things the show ever made. It required the version of Stewie who could be genuinely hurt, who could love genuinely, who could sit across from his closest friend and say something true without it being in service of a scheme. But the cost of the transition was the loss of something that was genuinely one of a kind. There have been 100 odd couple buddy comedies in animated television. There has been exactly one evil genius baby who built laser cannons in his crib and wanted to murder his mother and spoke like a Bond villain and made every scene he was in carry a charge of genuine danger. That character was retired not because he was exhausted, but because he was limiting, and the limitation was real, but so was the loss. The weapons are still in the nursery. The knowledge is still in the baby. The universe is still Stewie's creation, and the time machine is still Stewie's invention. The evil genius is gone from the surface. But the substrate of what made him extraordinary is still there. Behind the wall, in the room. The show stopped showing you. The mystery of what happened to Stewie is the mystery of what happens to every child who was extraordinary in a way that the world could not fully accommodate. He became something the world could accommodate. He became functional and likable and emotionally accessible and slightly less of himself. The weapons room is the monument to what he used to be. The show walks past it every episode without opening the door. Expansion Section 4 continued. The Real Meg and What the Show Almost Said. There is a version of Meg Griffin that the show has glimpsed across dozens of episodes and 25 years, and then always looked away from before it could fully come into focus. This version is not the punching bag and not the target, and not the walking demonstration of how a family can collectively decide that one of its members does not matter. This version is the person who would exist if the show's writers had ever decided they were more curious about Meg Griffin than they were comfortable using her. She is visible in specific moments scattered across the show's run. Not just the saxophone scene with Lisa Simpson, though that scene is the clearest single example. In the Season 5 episode Barely Legal, Meg develops a crush on Brian after he takes her to prom out of pity. The episode is primarily a comedy of Brian's discomfort and Meg's escalating infatuation. But embedded in it is a Meg who is funny and self-aware and capable of the kind of darkly comic observation about her own situation that the show usually reserves for its more sympathetically written characters. There is intelligence in her. The episode shows it and then moves on. In Steroids, Stewie briefly becomes popular and briefly gives Meg social advice. And for one episode, the show imagines a version of Meg who knows exactly what she is doing and is choosing to subvert social expectations deliberately rather than simply failing to meet them. It is a different character premise than the one the show uses for her normally. Not the girl who cannot fit in, but the girl who has chosen, for reasons the show never explores, not to bother fitting in because she has already looked at the social economy of her high school and found it not worth the cost of admission. That version of Meg is genuinely interesting. The episode does not develop her. Peter's Daughter, from Season 6, features Meg falling into a coma after a flood and nearly dying, and the episode briefly imagines what the Griffin household would be like if Meg died, using the near-death experience to force Peter to reckon, briefly, with what Meg means to him. Peter's grief in the episode is genuine. His relief at her recovery is genuine. The episode produces a version of Peter who genuinely loves his daughter, even if the show cannot maintain that version between episodes. These moments accumulate into a picture of a character the show kept finding and choosing not to develop. Meg is funny when the show lets her be funny. Meg is sharp when the show allows her to be sharp. Meg is capable of genuine emotional insight and genuinely interesting perspective on her own situation. The show has all of this information about her and has elected, season after season, to use her primarily as a demonstration of how not to treat people. The mystery of the locker baby is the most extreme version of the show's approach to Meg's hidden depths. For one scene in one episode, a baby lives in Meg's locker. The baby greets her excitedly. She shoves her books in its face. The baby is never seen again, but the image is so specific and so strange. A baby in a locker, accustomed to the locker as its environment, greeting its mother with pleasure, that it cannot be accidental. Someone wrote that. Someone decided that was the right detail to include. Someone had an idea, however fully formed or half-formed, about what Meg's locker baby meant. What did it mean? The show will never say, the baby will never return. The question of who the baby is and how it got there and what it says about Meg's life outside the Griffin household will remain permanently open. But its existence in that single scene is a door to a version of Meg Griffin that the show placed and then sealed. The Stan Thompson question sits similarly, a door that was opened in a single scene and immediately sealed without being passed through. But unlike the locker baby, which is strange enough to be easily filed under the show's general surrealism, the Stan Thompson revelation is a factual claim about a real thing. Meg has a biological father who is not Peter Griffin. This is information that was given to the audience in Season 3 and has never been given to Meg in any episode the show has aired. She has been living, across 22-plus subsequent seasons, in a household with people who know something foundational about her identity that she does not know. What would Meg Griffin do with the information that her biological father is a man named Stan Thompson? The show has never been curious enough about Meg Griffin to find out. That incuriosity, sustained across 25 years, is the most complete definition of the show's failure with this character. It is not that the show was cruel to Meg. Cruelty can be, in the right hands, a form of curiosity about what a person can survive. What the show did was less interesting than cruelty. It was incurious. It decided Meg was a resource rather than a subject, and it used her accordingly. And all the while, the questions about who she really was accumulated in the background, unanswered, waiting for a version of the show that was never going to come. Expansion Section 5 continued, The Griffin Bloodline and What It Cannot Mean. The question of Peter Griffin's ancestry becomes most interesting when you push it past the Mickey McFinnigan revelation and into the territory of what the show has claimed about the Griffin bloodline across its full run. The show has, across its history, depicted ancestors of the Griffin family in multiple historical periods. In Peter Griffin, Husband, Father, Brother, from Season 4, the show explores the family's history and depicts a black ancestor of Peter's, Nate Griffin, as an enslaved man in the antebellum American South. In Untitled Griffin Family History, the show returns to the family's historical roots and extends this lineage further, showing various periods in which Griffin ancestors existed. The implication across all of this is that the Griffin bloodline is real, traceable, and continuous from the 19th century through to Peter. This is incompatible with what Peter's two dads established. If Peter's biological father is Mickey McFinnigan, then Peter's bloodline is McFinnigan. The Griffin bloodline, the one that includes Nate, is Francis's bloodline, not Peter's. Peter's ancestors, biologically, are whoever Mickey McFinnigan's ancestors are. They are Irish. They are from McSwiggan Village in Ireland. They are not Nate Griffin's descendants. The show has never reconciled this. It appears not to have noticed the problem. But the problem is there, sitting in the continuity, and what it reveals about the show's relationship with its own mythology is interesting. The show builds its world in layers, adding new facts without always checking whether those facts are compatible with the facts already in the foundation. In a realistic genealogical sense, Peter Griffin's actual heritage is a mystery that the show has never accurately presented. He has presented himself, and been presented, as a working-class Irish-American from New England, shaped by the cultural inheritance of Francis Griffin's household and the specific texture of that household's Irish Catholicism. But he is not Francis Griffin's biological son. The cultural inheritance is real. It shaped who Peter became. The biological inheritance is Mickey McFinnigan's, which is also Irish, which means the Irishness is coherent even if the specific bloodline is not. But the African-American ancestry through Nate Griffin, which the show has used as a source of narrative material in multiple episodes, which has been presented as genuine family history, is not Peter's. It is the history of people whose blood Peter does not share. And the show has never been willing to think about what it means that it has been presenting borrowed ancestry as genuine. The most generous reading of this situation is that the show is making a statement about family that transcends biology, that the people who raise us are our ancestors in the ways that matter, that the bloodline that is chosen is more real than the bloodline that is merely inherited, and that Peter Griffin's relationship to Nate Griffin is real because Francis Griffin's choice to raise Peter made it real. This is a defensible and even beautiful idea. The show has never articulated it. It just left the contradiction sitting in the continuity, available for any viewer who looked carefully enough to find it. Peter Griffin is a man whose identity is a palimpsest layers of claimed and borrowed and partially true history laid over each other without a clear original document underneath. He is Irish by biology and Griffin by adoption and Mexican by birth certificate, and the show has never figured out what to do with the total of all of that, so it has simply run all of the layers simultaneously and hoped nobody looked too closely. Some of us looked too closely. That is why we are here. Expansion Section 7 continued. What Quagmire is actually looking for. Let us spend a moment more with the question of what Glenn Quagmire actually wants, because the show has been answering this question with more women for 25 years, and that answer is almost certainly wrong. The Cheryl Teague's backstory is the key. She is the one he wanted. She is the one he lost. Everything since has been an attempt to recover from losing her. The womanizing is not appetite, it is anesthesia. He is not trying to have more. He is trying to stop feeling the absence of one specific thing. This is a characterization that the show has made explicit multiple times but never committed to. It keeps offering the Cheryl Teague's backstory as an explanation and then declining to use it as an explanation in any sustained way. The explanation is offered and then put back on the shelf. Quagmire continues behaving as though the explanation does not exist. The show continues treating his womanizing as pure comedy, rather than as the elaborate and sustained grief response that its own established backstory identifies it as. What would Quagmire be if the show had ever committed to the Cheryl Teague's backstory as the organizing principle of his character? He would be a man searching for something he lost, and substituting everything else he can find for it, knowing on some level that nothing he finds will be it. He would be a character in genuine pain masquerading as someone who only ever experiences pleasure. He would be, in other words, not so different from Brian Griffin, who is also searching for something he cannot name, who is also using a performance of himself as protective architecture, who is also trying to fill a specific absence with general volume. The fact that Quagmire cannot stand Brian may be the most interesting irony the show has ever produced, even if it produced it accidentally. These two men, the one who performs intellectual sophistication over a foundation of actual failure, and the one who performs libertine ease over a foundation of genuine grief, are engaged in the same fundamental project of concealment, and they are each, on some level, the clearest mirror the other has access to. Neither of them can see it. The show sees it, occasionally, in moments of accidental honesty, and then retreats. The photographs of Lois are the last piece of this picture. Quagmire has loved Lois in whatever qualified and complicated sense he is capable of loving anyone for the entire run of the show. The photographs in his closet are 25 years of evidence of a sustained, unacted upon feeling that sits in him the way Cheryl Teague sits in him, as something genuine that he does not know what to do with and has not done anything about. He lives one door down from the woman he loves. He has her photographs on the inside of his closet door. He drinks with her husband every week. He watches them live their lives. He does not intervene. He does not confess. He does not stop watching. He just lives there, one door down, for 25 years, with the photographs and the drinking and the womanizing that is anesthesia for everything. The photographs and the drinking are also anesthesia for. That is either a comedy premise or it is the saddest arc in the show's run, quietly sustained across every season without ever being given a proper scene. The show chose comedy, but the sadness is there too, for anyone willing to feel it. Expansion Section 8 continued. The question of Kevin and the war that never ended. Kevin Swanson's story deserves more time than the show ever gave it. He was Joe and Bonnie's son. He appeared in early seasons as a background child, present in the Swanson household, the way the Griffin children appeared in the Griffin household as part of the furniture of a family life rather than as characters in their own right. He was sent to the military. He was reported killed in action. The death was noted in passing and mourned, if that is the right word, with the kind of casual dismissal the show often applied to significant events in supporting characters' lives. And then he came back. A Thanksgiving episode, the show chose Thanksgiving for this, which is either a coincidence or a piece of deliberate narrative irony that no one acknowledged brought Kevin home alive. He explained that he had deserted. He had been in the war and decided to leave it, and had been listed as dead either because the records were wrong or because desertion was coded as death to protect someone from consequences. Kevin deserted. He is alive. He comes home on a holiday and sits at the table with his father. Joe Swanson is many things, but among the most consistent things he has been across the show's entire run is a law enforcement officer who takes the law seriously. His injury was sustained in the line of duty. His identity is built around the specific form of institutional loyalty and civic responsibility that police work represents. In its best form, Joe Swanson, when the show treats him with any respect, is a man who believes in the rules not blindly but genuinely, with the conviction of someone who has paid a serious price for the rules and found the price worth paying. Kevin violated one of the most serious rules that institutional loyalty recognizes. He left. He was deployed. He made a decision to not continue. He deserted his post in a combat zone. Whether his reasons were valid, and the show does not spend much time on his reasons, because the show is not particularly interested in the war or in Kevin's experience of it, the fact of the desertion is significant. Kevin Swanson deserted from the United States military, and his father is a decorated police officer who built his entire identity around exactly the opposite kind of commitment. What is their relationship like after Thanksgiving dinner? What happens when Kevin moves back in, or when he tries to, or when the question of what he did and what it means for him legally comes up? Is Kevin in any jeopardy? Has the military pursued him? Has Joe, as a law enforcement officer, any professional obligation he has to navigate around his personal relief that his son is alive? These questions are asked by the premise of Kevin's return and answered by nothing that follows, because the show's next episode simply resumed its normal operations without looking back. The Kevin Swanson storyline is one of the show's most complete examples of a story that was set up with enough specificity to have real implications, and then dropped before any of those implications could develop. He came back. He was alive. He had done something significant. And then the show moved on, and Kevin moved with it, back into the off-screen world where inconvenient complications go to wait for the episode that never comes. Expansion Section 9 continued. Lois's dark side, and the question of what she is capable of. There is another Lois that the show has glimpsed occasionally across its run, in the spaces between the patient mother and the long-suffering wife. A Lois who is capable of violence and moral flexibility and a specific kind of cold-blooded decision-making that the show hints at and then retreats from. She became a professional wrestler. Not for a single gag, she had a professional career as a wrestler, conducted over multiple episodes of Season 4. Her ring name was Punching Lois. She was genuinely good at it. The skill that was required to be good at it, the physical aggression, the comfort with violence, the willingness to hurt people in a structured context, was present in her before the wrestling career began. The career revealed it. It did not create it. She has a black belt in Taijutsu. This is mentioned occasionally across the show's run, usually in the context of a single scene in which Lois is briefly terrifying, and then filed away and not integrated into her character in any sustained way. She is capable of serious physical violence. The show acknowledges this fact in isolated episodes and then does not build it into who she is. The Bottle episode line, "I'm just a secret little psycho with very little to lose," is delivered in a comedic context and played for laughs. But take the comedy insulation off that line, and what you have is Lois Griffin doing something the show has almost never allowed her to do, telling the truth about herself without irony. She is describing a real condition. She is describing someone who has been keeping something dangerous under sustained pressure for a long time and who is reaching the edge of what sustained pressure can maintain. What is Lois actually capable of? The show has been asking this question sideways across its run, without ever asking it directly. She is capable of violence, the wrestling career, and the martial arts training demonstrate this. She is capable of sustained deception. She has kept the Stan Thompson secret from Meg for the entire duration of Meg's life. She is capable of managing the revelation of an institutionalized brother and a Holocaust survivor mother and a potentially abusive father without those revelations visibly breaking her. She is capable of loving a man as chaotic and as often awful as Peter Griffin for 25 years and choosing to keep choosing him. These are not the capabilities of someone who is simply patient and organized. These are the capabilities of someone who has extraordinary interior resources deployed in the management of an extraordinary amount of information and difficulty, and who has learned to make that management invisible, because making it visible would require the people around her to see her differently than they are accustomed to seeing her. The secret little psycho with very little to lose. The show said it once and filed it. But it is the most accurate self-description any character in the show has ever offered, and the mystery it opens, what is Lois Griffin like when she stops managing? What would she do if the management stopped being worth the cost? Is one the show has been sitting next to for 25 years without ever deciding to open. Expansion Section 10 continued. The Drunken Clam and What It Knows. There is a bar at the center of this story that has been there the whole time, and the bar knows things. The Drunken Clam has been Peter Griffin's primary social institution since the first episode of the show. He has been going there for 25 years, with the same 3 friends, sitting in the same approximate configuration at the same approximate table, drinking the same approximate beer. The bar has seen everything. It has been present for every conversation these 4 men have had in its space across the show's entire run. Horace, the original proprietor of the Drunken Clam, was there for most of it. He was a background character for the show's early and middle seasons present, serving, occasionally given a line, never given a story. When the show killed him off, it did so with unusual restraint. His death was treated with a kind of quiet seriousness that the show does not usually extend to background characters. He was there and then he was not, and the Drunken Clam passed to new ownership, and the show acknowledged the passing without playing it for comedy. What did Horace know? He served these 4 men for years. He heard their conversations. He watched their friendships develop and change and strain under the weight of things they did to each other. He heard the Loretta conversations. He heard the Kevin conversations. He heard the Cheryl Teague's conversations, to whatever extent those happened in the bar rather than entirely in Quagmire's private thoughts. He was the institution through which the friendship group's history was conducted. He is gone now. Whatever he knew about Peter and Quagmire and Joe and Cleveland, the version of their history that is visible from behind a bar rather than from inside the friendship went with him. The new proprietor knows only what has happened since the transition. The accumulated knowledge of the bar's original keeper is lost. The loss of Horace is the show's most effective use of a background death, because it is the loss that no one in the show registers as a loss of anything except the familiar face behind the bar. Nobody thinks Horace knew things. Nobody thinks, with Horace gone, the institutional memory of this friendship group's most significant years is no longer accessible. They order their beers from whoever replaced him and sit in the same spots and have the same conversations, and the record Horace kept across all the years is simply gone. The Drunken Clam continues. The friendship continues. The light at the bar is still on. just like the light on Spooner Street. But something was lost when Horace left, and the show was too understated in the moment of his passing to make clear what it was. It was the witness, the background figure who had heard everything, the person at the center of the show's social world who had access to its full history from the best possible angle. He is gone. The bar is still open. And the four men still sit in their spots, talking about their days, in the place where everything that happened between them happened, and the walls remember what the people in them cannot be made to admit. Expansion Section 11 continued, the simulation and its maintenance. If the town is a simulation, the question of how it is maintained becomes interesting in ways that connect to the show's specific patterns of inconsistency. A simulation maintained by a single operator, even an extraordinarily capable one, would show the particular fingerprints of that maintenance. It would be most detailed and most consistent in the areas the operator cares about most, and least consistent in the areas that matter less to them. The spaces that the simulation's author visits frequently would be rendered at higher resolution. The spaces visited infrequently would be rendered more loosely, with the kind of approximate correctness that comes from regenerating something from memory rather than from a fixed specification. This pattern is exactly what the show displays. The Griffin House interior, where the most important characters spend the most time, where the simulation's author presumably visits most frequently in his imagination, is the most inconsistent part of the show's visual world. Not because no one was paying attention to it, but because it is rendered from the inside rather than from a single authoritative blueprint. It is imagined rather than specified, and the imagining produces a space that feels right without being precisely the same each time. The kitchen and the living room and the stairs are always familiar. Their exact relationship to each other varies because the simulation renders them each time they are needed, rather than maintaining a fixed structural record. The town's exterior spaces, the bar, the park, the street, the pier are more consistent because they are viewed from the outside rather than inhabited from within, and exterior views are easier to maintain at consistent resolution because they do not require the simulation to populate them with the specific textures of a lived interior. You can remember what a building looks like from the outside more reliably than you can remember every detail of the inside. The background characters are the most consistent element of all because they are the simplest. They do not have interiors to maintain, they are appearances. The simulation generates them from a stored set of appearances and positions them in crowd scenes where they are needed. They do not change because they do not need to change. They are not complex enough to drift. Their perfect consistency across 25 years is the consistency of simple objects in a complex environment maintained easily because they require almost nothing. The simulation hypothesis does not resolve every mystery. It cannot explain everything. But it provides a framework in which the show's inconsistencies and mysteries are features rather than flaws, evidence of a created world rather than a careless one. And that is, finally, the most generous reading of everything we have walked through tonight. The show was made by people who cared about it, who failed it in specific ways, who succeeded at it in specific ways, who left more unresolved than any show of its ambition should have. But the unresolved things are there because someone put them there. The light is on because someone turned it on. The mysteries exist because someone thought to place them. That is enough. It has always been enough. Expansion Section 12 continued. The specific loneliness of the author inside the story. Let us sit one more time with Stewie's position in the simulation, because I do not think we have fully felt what it would mean to be him. He is 1 year old. He has been 1 year old for 25 years of broadcast time. He wakes up in the same crib in the same nursery and faces the same family every day. He has the weapons behind the wall that he no longer uses, and the time machine that he still uses, occasionally. And the knowledge that he made everything the universe, the town, the house, the family, the crib, the nursery ceiling he stares at sitting somewhere in his mind alongside everything else. He cannot tell anyone. Not because there is a rule against telling them, not because telling them would break something, but because there is nobody in his simulation who would know what to do with being told. Brian would process it as an interesting theoretical claim and probably be drunk by the time Stewie finished explaining it. Peter would not understand it and would almost certainly convert it into a joke about himself within 15 seconds. Lois would smile and offer Stewie his bottle. Meg would find some way to relate it to her own suffering. Chris would not be listening. The only person who has ever genuinely engaged with the full strangeness of what Stewie is has been Brian. And Brian does not know. He knows that Stewie is extraordinary. He knows that Stewie is more than a baby in ways that cannot be fully explained. He knows, after the Christmas Guy episode, that Stewie is capable of a love that goes deep enough to run a time machine through history to prevent a death. But he does not know what Stewie actually is. He has never asked the right question directly enough to get the right answer. And Stewie has never offered it, because offering it would change what Brian sees when he looks at him, and what Brian currently sees when he looks at him is the thing Stewie values most in his existence. A friend who treats him like a person. The moment Brian learned that Stewie created the universe, their relationship would become something different. Not worse, necessarily, but different. Brian would look at Stewie and see the cause of everything, and that is not how you look at a friend. That is how you look at something beyond category, something that is not quite companionable in the way that a friend needs to be companionable. So, Stewie keeps it to himself. He lives inside the thing he made, watched by the simulation he runs, surrounded by characters he designed, carrying the knowledge of what he is in a body that looks like a baby and a voice that sounds like a performance. And what he does with all of this extraordinary and isolating knowledge is what any lonely being does when they cannot share what they know. He makes things. He builds weapons. He writes schemes. He has adventures. He goes on road trips with his best friend and tries, in the specific way that the show has been most honest about, to make the constructed world feel like a real one by filling it with real things. The love is real. Whatever simulation is running, whatever cosmology contains it, the love between Stewie and Brian is the realest thing in the show. It is the element most resistant to the reset button. It is the thing the show has come back to across every change in Stewie's character and every transition in Brian's. Even when the show was at its most cynical about both characters, it could not make the love between them false. It was always there, underneath the performance and underneath the simulation and underneath the mystery of what either of them actually is. That love is the answer to the final mystery, not a cosmological answer, a human one. Whatever is happening on Spooner Street, whatever the physics of this world, whatever the mechanism of its maintenance, whatever the true nature of the baby in the nursery, the love in the show is genuine. It was placed there by people who understood something real about attachment and loyalty, and the specific way that the most unlikely friendships can become the most essential ones. The mystery is not resolved. The light is still on. Stewie is still in his crib. The weapons are still behind the wall. The novel is still unfinished. The father does not know his own name, and the daughter does not know her own father, and the wife carries her history quietly, and the dog drinks his martini, and tries to close the distance between who he performs himself to be and who he actually is. And in all of this, in the center of all of this, is the love. Imperfect and incomplete and constantly threatened by the show's worst impulses and constantly reasserting itself anyway. The love that made Stewie run a time machine through history to save his best friend. The love that made Brian, for a brief 2-episode period, the most missed presence on television. The love that made the Griffin family, even at their worst, difficult to fully give up on. Whatever the show is, whatever its world is, whatever the nature of the reality that Stewie built and maintains, the love is real. And the love is what makes the mysteries matter. Because mysteries in a world you do not care about are just inconsistencies. Mysteries in a world you love are invitations. Come in further. Look more closely. There is more here than you have seen yet. There is always more. The light is on. Expansion. A final meditation. 25 years of questions. 25 years. That is how long this show has been asking questions it never intended to answer. It started as a comedy about a ridiculous family in a ridiculous town, and it accumulated across its run a mythology of extraordinary complexity and extraordinary incompleteness. The mythology was not planned. It was not the result of a writer's room sitting down and designing a 25-year arc of mysteries for the audience to decode. It grew the way mythology always grows, from the accumulation of stories told by many different people across a long period, each story adding something, none of them perfectly reconciling with the ones that came before. The Family Guy mythology is full of internal contradictions. Peter Griffin's ancestry does not make sense. Brian Griffin's nature does not have an explanation. Stewie Griffin's power has implications that the show introduced and then chose not to follow. Meg Griffin's backstory contains revelations that were made and never resolved. The town's geography is not consistent. The rules of mortality are not applied evenly. The cutaway format implies something about the show's cosmology that the show has never committed to articulating. These contradictions are not, in the main, things the show was trying to hide from you. They are not puzzles with solutions. They are the residue of a creative process conducted at speed by many different people across an extraordinary length of time, without a single consistent guiding intelligence, maintaining the internal coherence of everything produced. But residue can be beautiful. Residue is authentic. The sediment left by 25 years of a show that was, at its best, genuinely trying to be something, and that failed and succeeded in specific ways, and left behind this accumulation of questions and unresolved possibilities, is a record of what the show was reaching for, even when it could not quite get there. The unfinished novel is the show. The weapons in the nursery are the show. The secret father and the hidden brother and the mother who keeps her history quiet and the man who does not know his own origins, all of this is the show. Not the parts that are presented proudly, but the parts that are present anyway, in the background and the edges and the spaces between the jokes where the real things always live. This is what we have been walking through tonight. Not the show's failures, there are other places for that conversation. The show's depth. The depth that was always there, always waiting, always accumulating while the show went about its business of being a cartoon about a fat man in Rhode Island. The light has been on for 25 years. It is still on. Whatever it illuminates is still there, and we will keep coming back to it, and walking through it, and feeling what it feels like to be in the presence of a world that is strange and incomplete and full of questions that will never be answered, and somehow also full of love. That is enough. That has always been enough. Sleep well. Deep dive the Bertram problem, a half-brother nobody remembered. There is a child who should matter more to the show than the show has ever allowed. Bertram was the product of Peter Griffin's sperm donation history. The show established this in Season 3, when a plotline revealed that Peter had donated extensively at a fertility clinic and that the donations had produced an unknown number of biological children. Most of these children were background elements of a single-episode biological half-siblings of the Griffin children, connected to Peter by genetics and nothing else, existing as a comedic premise and then disappearing. Bertram was different. He recurred. He appeared as a baby in Stewie's playgroup, recognizable by his distinctive dark hair and the specific quality of hostility he directed toward Stewie. He was, the show established gradually, another genius baby not as advanced as Stewie, not possessed of the same cosmological significance, but genuinely intelligent and genuinely dangerous in his own right, with his ambitions directed specifically at Stewie's elimination. In The Big Bang Theory, Bertram was killed by Stewie. Not accidentally, not as a comedic casualty, but deliberately Stewie killed his half-brother to prevent Bertram from destroying the causal chain that led to Stewie being born, which would have unmade the universe. Stewie killed Bertram and the universe continued. Bertram has not appeared since, but the premise his existence established has never been closed. Peter's sperm donations produced an unknown number of biological children. The show noted this in its Season 3 episode and then moved on. Somewhere in the show's universe there are an unknown number of people who share Peter Griffin's biology. They are out there in the fictional Rhode Island town and possibly beyond it, living their lives without knowing that they are the biological children of the man at the center of this show. They are Peter's children, in the biological sense that Peter is Mickey McFinnigan's son, connected by genetics, unknown to each other, the bloodline spreading forward through time in ways nobody is tracking. What does this mean for Meg, who is apparently not Peter's biological daughter, and who has half-siblings she does not know about from a father she has never met, and other half-siblings, the sperm donation children who share her nominal father's genetics while she does not? Her family tree is a web of connections and disconnections that the show laid the groundwork for across multiple seasons and then declined to map. The Bertram plotline connected to the deepest mystery in the show Stewie's creation of the universe, the paradox of his existence being necessary for the universe to exist, and then ended with a child's death and the universe's preservation. This is extraordinary narrative material. The show used it for a Season 9 episode and then moved past it. returning to the lighter comedic Stewie rather than the character who had just killed his half-brother to preserve the fabric of reality. What did that killing cost Stewie? Not legally. There are no legal consequences for a baby killing another baby in a pre-universe space outside the space-time continuum. But emotionally, morally, spiritually, in whatever sense those categories apply to a being of Stewie's nature, he killed someone who shared his father's blood to preserve his own existence and the existence of everything else. He made a choice between himself and Bertram, and he chose himself. And he chose correctly by the logic of the situation, and the correctness of the choice does not exhaust its weight. The show did not examine this. It moved on. But the weight is there, sitting in Stewie's history, another piece of what he carries. Another room in the archive of things that happened and were absorbed without being fully metabolized. Deep dive the Peter and Brian friendship and what made it real. Before the show changed them, before Peter became the cruel version of himself and Brian became the pretentious version of himself, there was a friendship at the center of the show that was one of the most genuine things about it. Peter and Brian, a stupid man and a smart dog who liked each other anyway, whose liking was not, despite their differences, but somehow made richer by them. Brian was the voice of reason that Peter needed, and rarely heeded. Peter was the grounding in ordinary life that Brian needed and occasionally despised. They were, in the technical vocabulary of comedy structure, an excellent odd couple. They were also, at the show's best, something more than that. They were friends in the specific way that people become friends without deciding to, not because they sought each other out, not because they chose each other on the basis of compatible values or shared interests, but because they were placed next to each other by circumstance and found, over time, that something necessary had grown in the space between them. Brian moved into the Griffin household. Peter found him on the road. Neither of them was looking for what they found. And what they found was the best version of what either of them was capable of being, reflected back by someone who knew them without judging them all the way down. This friendship is the show's foundational relationship, and it is also the show's most abandoned mystery in the emotional sense. What happened to it? Not in the catastrophic terms of specific events that damaged it, though specific events did damage it. In the broader sense of how two characters who genuinely needed each other and genuinely brought out something true in each other gradually became a lesser version of what they had been, and why the show allowed that to happen rather than protecting what was there. The early Brian and Peter episodes Peter Griffin, husband, father, brother, Brian, portrait of a dog, Road to Rhode Island, have a quality of genuine warmth that the show produced less frequently as it went on. Brian helping Peter. Peter understanding Brian in ways that surprised both of them. The friendship working as a friendship, not as a vehicle for comedy about their differences, but as a real relationship that produced real moments of real recognition between two very different people who had come to matter to each other. That quality did not disappear entirely. It persisted in specific episodes across the show's entire run, but it became rarer. The friendship receded as a primary source of the show's emotional texture, and what replaced it was louder and more aggressive and less true. The mystery of the Peter and Brian friendship is the mystery of all the show's best things, not where they went, because they are still there, available in old episodes, preserved on whatever streaming services carry the show's archive. The mystery is why the show stopped protecting them, why the writers stopped treating the warmth at the center of the show as worth maintaining, why the loudness was allowed to win. There is no answer to this that is not also an answer about the nature of long-running creative projects in general. They are made by many people over many years, and no single quality can be protected against the entropy of time and the turnover of staffs, and the pressures of commercial demands, and the simple fact that the people who understood why something worked are not always the people who are working on it later. But the warmth was there. It is still available to anyone who goes back and watches the early seasons. The friendship between Peter Griffin and Brian Griffin, at its best, was what the whole show was built on. Two completely different beings choosing each other anyway, every day, because the choosing was the best thing either of them did. That is still true. It has always been true, and it is the reason the mysteries we have been walking through tonight matter not as puzzles to solve, but as evidence of how much was invested in this world. How many things were built into it? How deep the people who made it were willing to go, even when they were not sure what they were building toward. The light on Spooner Street is the friendship between Peter Griffin and Brian Griffin. It was the first thing lit. It is the last thing that will go out, if anything ever does. Deep dive what the show never said about time. The time machine has been in the show since the early seasons, and the show has almost never thought carefully about what it means. Time travel stories, when they are taken seriously, require their creators to think about causality in ways that most story forms do not. If you change the past, you change the future that grew from it. If you change the future, you alter the conditions that led to the change. The paradoxes are real, in the logical sense, not physically real, but structurally real, in the sense that a story that involves time travel has to make choices about how causality works in its world, and then be consistent about those choices. Family Guy made a choice. Causality works when it is convenient and does not work when it is not. The time machine has been used for adventures that did not produce lasting consequences, and for at least one adventure that produced enormous consequences: Brian's resurrection, Bertram's death, the universe being preserved. The same device produces radically different effects on the timeline depending on what the episode needs. This is not a criticism. It is an observation about how the show has used an extraordinary premise in the most utilitarian way possible. The time machine is a plot device. It does what plots need it to do. That is what plot devices are for. But the time machine is also, in the show's own cosmology, the device that made the universe. The device that is used when Brian needs to be pulled back from a date that is going badly, or when Stewie needs to undo a mistake. That device, in the single most cosmologically significant use it was ever put to, created all of physical existence. The contrast between these uses is the funniest thing about the time machine, and also the most philosophically interesting thing about it. The device that made the stars has been used to fix awkward social situations. The machine that is responsible for the existence of all matter and energy and time itself has been deployed to help a dog get out of an uncomfortable conversation. The gap between the device's maximum possible significance and its routine actual use is the gap between what Stewie is at his deepest level, the creator, the author of everything, and how he spends most of his time, managing, adjusting, improving small things, solving problems that would not exist if the simulation he were running were better maintained. He made everything. He spends his days fixing small things in it. This is, if you squint, what all creators do. The act of creation is enormous and singular. The maintenance of what was created is small and continuous, and it is where most of the actual time goes. Stewie created the universe, and then he has been maintaining it, episode by episode, since. Not heroically, not dramatically. Just carefully, in the nursery, with the tools he built and the knowledge he was born with and the family he arranged around himself so that he would have company while he did the work. The time machine is the maintenance tool. It is what he uses when something in the simulation drifts too far from what he intended. Brian died and the simulation was worse without him. Stewie fixed it. That is the whole story of Christmas Guy, told in the language of the simulation hypothesis. The author corrected a narrative mistake and restored the simulation to its preferred state. Every time travel episode is Stewie doing maintenance. Every adventure outside the space-time continuum is the author stepping outside the story to adjust something. Every paradox avoided is the simulation's integrity preserved. He is always working. He never stops. And nobody in the simulation knows it, and he cannot tell them. And he has built a world full of love and mystery and unanswered questions, and he tends to it every day from his high chair in the nursery. That is who Stewie Griffin is. That is the answer to the deepest mystery the show produced. He is the caretaker of everything. He is alone in that role in a way nothing else in the show's universe can be. And the love he has for Brian is the love of a caretaker for the one element of the simulation that chose him back, not because Stewie arranged it, not because the simulation required it, but because Brian, somehow, even inside a world that Stewie made, found Stewie and decided to be his friend freely. That choice is the most extraordinary thing in the show. Not the weapons, not the Big Bang, not the time machine or the simulations or the mysteries we have cataloged tonight. The choice Brian made to be Stewie's friend, made freely, inside a constructed world, by a consciousness that should not exist in the body it inhabits, is the single most remarkable event in the Family Guy universe. The show produced it by accident, or almost by accident, or in the way that the best things in long-running creative projects happen, through the accumulation of small, good decisions made by people who were trying to tell a story and stumbled, over time, into something true. The light is still on. Sleep well. Deep dive the question of consciousness in this universe. One of the threads that runs through nearly every mystery we have walked through tonight is a question that the show has never explicitly asked, but has been approaching from multiple directions across its entire run. What is consciousness in this universe, and what explains its distribution? Brian Griffin is conscious in the full sense. He thinks, reasons, feels, grieves, loves, is ambitious, is disappointed, is occasionally cruel, is occasionally generous. He has an inner life indistinguishable in its texture from the inner lives of the human characters around him. He is conscious. Stewie Griffin is conscious in an even fuller sense. He is aware of things that no other character is aware of. He has built devices that suggest a grasp of physical reality deeper than any human scientist alive. He is, if the cosmological implications of the Big Bang revelation are taken seriously, the consciousness at the center of everything. God is conscious. He appears in multiple episodes as a personality, with preferences and opinions and the capacity to make deals and be persuaded and be annoyed. Death is conscious. He has feelings. He has a personality. He has a physical body that can sustain ankle sprains. The giant chicken is conscious. He has a wife. He holds grudges. He maintains continuity of identity across decades of encounters with Peter Griffin. Whatever process produces consciousness in this universe has produced it in a chicken of unusual size. Various talking animals beyond Brian appear in the show's universe without explanation. The fish with the German scientist consciousness in American Dad is the clearest example from the shared universe. But within Family Guy itself, there are other animals who speak, reason, and behave in ways that suggest consciousness. The show has never established a rule for when animals are conscious and when they are not, which means the distribution of consciousness in this universe is either random or governed by something that has never been named. What governs it? The CIA experiment hypothesis that some talking animals are the result of consciousness transfer procedures provides a partial answer. The Big Bang cosmology, in which Stewie created the universe, provides another partial answer. If the universe was created by a specific consciousness with specific preferences, that consciousness might have built the distribution of consciousness into the universe's physical laws in ways that reflect those preferences. In this reading, the reason there is a talking dog in the Griffin household is that the being who made the universe wanted there to be a talking dog in the Griffin household. The reason that particular dog is particularly intelligent and culturally sophisticated is that the maker of the universe wanted his family to have a companion of genuine substance. The reason Brian is capable of being Stewie's real friend is that Stewie designed the universe somewhere in the space outside the space-time continuum in a way that would produce exactly this. This is either the most beautiful or the most troubling possible reading of the Brian Griffin mystery. Beautiful, because it means Brian's existence is not an accident but an intention that his extraordinary nature was placed there by someone who wanted exactly him. Troubling because it means Brian's love for Stewie, which feels freely chosen and genuine, might have been engineered into him from the moment of his creation by the being he loves most. The show has never asked this question. It has never gotten close to asking it, but the materials for asking it have been present in the show's mythology since at least the Big Bang Theory, and they remain present. And the question is real. If Stewie made the universe, did he make Brian? Did he make him to be his friend? And if he did, what does that mean for the love between them that we have spent 25 years watching and finding, somehow, more real than almost anything else the show produced? The most honest answer is probably, it does not matter. Whether Brian was designed to love Stewie or arrived at that love through the genuine exercise of whatever kind of will a consciousness-transferred Labrador has, the love exists. It is real in every way that love needs to be real to count. The origin of a feeling does not invalidate the feeling. The mechanism that produced a friendship does not make the friendship less genuine. Stewie made everything, including, possibly, the being that would become his closest friend. And if he did, then the loneliness we identified at the beginning of this section, the loneliness of the author who cannot be known by the characters inside the story, is less than it appeared. Because the author, if he made Brian, made him to be known by. made him specifically to be the one character in the simulation who could see Stewie clearly enough to be his friend. That is not a lonely story. That is the opposite of a lonely story. That is the story of a being who, in making everything, made sure to include something that would make everything bearable. The light on Spooner Street. Brian at the kitchen table, nursing his martini. Stewie in the nursery, watching the simulation run. The weapons behind the wall. The novel still unfinished. The love still there. Still there. Deep dive the show's relationship with its own legacy. There is one more mystery worth sitting with before we close. And it is the meta-mystery, the mystery of why the show has continued. At some point in its middle period, Family Guy stopped being primarily driven by the creative passion of the people who made it and started being driven primarily by the commercial logic of the business that owned it. Seth MacFarlane acknowledged this openly in 2024, describing the show's continuation in terms of financial utility and audience demand rather than creative necessity. The show makes money. It continues to be cheap to produce relative to live-action alternatives. It generates revenue from reruns and streaming. It maintains brand value across merchandise and licensing. It continues not because anyone is burning with a desire to tell more Griffin family stories, but because the economics still make sense. This is not an unusual situation for a long-running television franchise. Many beloved shows have spent their later years running on institutional momentum rather than creative vision. The economic logic and the creative logic part ways at some point in almost every long run. But the mysteries we have been discussing tonight do not care about the economic logic. They exist in the show's mythology regardless of the circumstances of the show's continued production. The Stan Thompson revelation is in Season 3. It is there regardless of what Season 23 looks like. The Big Bang episode is in Season 9. The Cheryl Tiegs backstory, the Patrick Pewterschmidt institutionalization, the Locker Baby, the Carrots, all of this is in the show's mythology, accumulated and preserved, regardless of what motivated the episodes that contain them or the episodes that came after. The mysteries exist. The questions are real. The light is on because it was lit by someone who cared enough to light it, and it has stayed on long past the point where the person who lit it was actively tending it, and it is still going when we come to it tonight. That is, in a way, the final mystery of Family Guy. Not any specific unanswered question about the characters or the universe, but the larger question of what it means for a creative work to outlast the conditions of its creation. The show that was made with passion in 1999 is not exactly the same show that is produced today, but the questions that were planted in 1999 are still alive. The characters who were built with care in those first 3 seasons are still present in every season that followed, even in their degraded forms present precisely because they were built well enough to persist through all the things the show did to them. The mystery of the show's survival is the mystery of why certain things persist. Why the love between Stewie and Brian survived everything the show did to both characters. Why the question of Meg's father persists across 22 seasons since it was raised. Why Brian's unfinished novel, which has never been written, which will probably never be written, which exists only as a title and a synopsis, and an emotional symbol of the gap between aspiration and achievement feels like a real book. A book we wish we could read. A book that should exist, somewhere in the show's universe, even if the show has never found the will to write it. The things built well enough last. The mysteries planted deeply enough persist. The light lit carefully enough stays on. That is enough. That has always been enough. It will keep being enough. Close your eyes. The light is on. Sleep well. Uncle Guy Lore https://www.com/@UncleGuyLore. If you found your way through this entire journey tonight, from the very first knock on the door of Spooner Street to these final thoughts, we are genuinely grateful. There is something extraordinary about the company of people who are willing to walk long distances with you into the dark corners of something they love. Tell us in the comments, what time is it where you are? What mystery are you still turning over? What did we miss that you have always wanted someone to look at? What do you think is really happening on Spooner Street, at the bottom of all of it? Subscribe if this is the kind of company you want to keep. We will be here. The light is on. Closing thoughts, everything we did not say. A walk this long always leaves things behind. There are threads we barely touch that deserve their own hour. We did not spend enough time on Chris Griffin, who is one of the show's most consistently underwritten characters and who has, embedded in his background, a few details that the show planted and never developed. The old man in the attic who appeared in a few early episodes, the mysterious presence in the Griffin house, who was there and then was not, and who was never explained to anyone's satisfaction. Chris's artistic talent, which appeared in certain early episodes and was depicted with genuine craft, and which the show mostly discarded as his characterization flattened into a single note of awkward humor. The suggestion, in at least one episode, that Chris's social difficulties are more complex than simple adolescent clumsiness. We did not spend enough time on the drunken clam itself as a space on what it means that the four men at the center of the show's social world have spent 25 years in the same bar, processing everything that happens to them through the same ritual of drinks and conversation, and how the bar has served as the primary site of whatever genuine emotional reckoning these men have ever managed to have with each other. The bar is where Cleveland told Peter about Loretta. The bar is where the group's most significant conversations happen. The bar is, in the vocabulary of the show's emotional geography, the place where things can be said that cannot be said anywhere else, and we walked past it faster than it deserved. We did not spend enough time on the question of Bonnie Swanson, Joe's wife, who spent the first decade of the show's run visibly pregnant before eventually giving birth in a surprisingly late-season episode. A pregnancy that lasted several years of broadcast time and was played primarily as a background joke. Bonnie had a storyline in later seasons in which she contemplated leaving Joe, which was treated with more seriousness than most of the show's relationship crises. What did Bonnie want? Who is Bonnie beyond her role as Joe's wife and the mother of Kevin and Susie? The show never decided to be curious about this. We did not spend enough time on the mystery of why certain characters who were prominent in early seasons faded almost completely from the show's later seasons. Meg's friend Ruth, who appeared in multiple early episodes and then vanished. The neighbor Bonnie's presence becoming purely incidental after years of being a recurring presence. The slow disappearance of Tom Tucker's character depth as the show increasingly used him only as an anchor for the local news gag rather than as a person with a life outside the news studio. All of these are their own categories of mystery. All of them are part of the same larger pattern. A show building a world in the early seasons with more detail than it could sustain, planting elements that it intended to develop and then chose not to, and leaving those elements in the background of the continuing show as permanent evidence of what it had once planned to be. That evidence is the richest thing about Family Guy, finally. Not the resolved stories. Not the jokes that landed. Not the moments of genuine brilliance, though those matter. The richest thing is the accumulated evidence of intention. All the things the show planted that it never grew into, all the rooms it built and never entered, all the lights it turned on and then walked past without seeing what they illuminated. The show is those intentions. The mysteries are those intentions. The love that persists through everything the show did wrong is those intentions. Someone cared enough at the beginning to build something with enough depth that 25 years of production still has not exhausted it. That is the final thing worth saying. The light is still on because the person who lit it cared, and so do you. That is why you are here. That is why we are all here. The light is on.